Good evening, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. This is a call to order of the Aspen City Council regular meeting for June 25th, 2024. Could we have a roll call for attendance, please?
Councillor Doyle.
Here.
Councillor Guth. Councillor Howenstein.
Present.
Councillor Rose.
Here.
Mayor Tory.
Here as well. Councilor Guth will not be joining us today. He is called out of town on some family business. No scheduled public appearances, which will bring us right to citizens' comments and petitions. This is an opportunity for citizens to address council on issues not scheduled for a public hearing. We ask that you limit your comments to about 3 minutes so that everybody can have a fair and equal opportunity to speak this evening. Are there members of the public that wish to address council tonight? Steve, come on up.
Where do I go? Here?
Right in the middle is good, and if those, yep, those are green.
Blue? Does blue count as green?
Maybe you're colorblind.
Could be. My grandson says everything is blue.
If you just introduce yourself for the record.
Steve Fallender,
Thank you.
Aspen. I'm here to talk to you, asking you to remove the cap on demolition permits. I mean, I've been opposed to that for a long time. It hit me more recently when our neighbor across the street passed away. She has a house that was built in the 60s. I'm sure she's going to be in for one of the 2 permits for people who've lived here for over 35 years. But she now has to go, her family has to go through the process, not only of trying to sell the house, but to get a permit so that the house can be demolished. Like I said, it was built in the 60s. Our house was initially built in the 50s, added on to in the 70s, fixed up a little in the 90s. And if something would happen to my wife or I, and we're 75 now, it's likely that our house would be sold to somebody who would like to build a new house that meets all of the new codes, that has all of the energy efficiency, all of the utility lines coming in that are new instead of ours. We had to replace our water line because it just disintegrated. That's who we're probably going to end up having to sell to. And it seems ridiculous that we should have to go through an extra process of getting a demolition permit. People are playing games now with getting demolition permits before they really want to demolish, trying to anticipate when they might have to sell. We're not going to do that. But the process doesn't make sense. You passed regulations to try to reduce the amount of waste that goes into the landfill. That's great. That should stay in effect, and it should affect all projects that are significant, even the renovations downtown that are not considered demolitions. I don't know whether it does or not. But the rest of it, there was a lot of outcry about, oh, there's too much construction going in certain neighborhoods, including in the West End. Well, right now, there is so much traffic in town, and I'm not complaining about it. I'm just stating a fact. There is so much construction going on. It is Aspen. It's the Ideas Festival. It's the Music Festival. It's Food and Wine. It's all of the homeowners who are having their houses painted and their lawns fixed up so the neighborhood looks beautiful. That is happening whether there's demolition or not. The process to get a building permit is extensive here. The codes are extremely complicated, which makes the process of building a house here beyond anything I can imagine. That's enough. So I ask you to get rid of that code. We're gonna have very soon a project proposed by the Aspen Institute, the Meadows, to build 3 employee housing projects. And are you gonna turn those down because there's too much construction? We have hotels being built. We have the Mountain Chalet being remodeled. I understand, Tori. But it's time to eliminate that extra process. It's not necessary. It's not accomplishing anything today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Rachel?
Thank you so much for having public comment this evening. I'm here to talk about the entrance to Aspen, and ironically, this headline came out the day I was speaking to the EOTC meeting, the RAFTA board meeting, and it seems to me the headline is wrong. It shouldn't be the straight shot can wait. It should be mass transit will wait, because the system that you're designing and the reason you don't want to have a NEPA review of that system is because it disadvantages mass transit. And I want to give a little bit of a history lesson. You know, the straight shot was a real terrible thing. In the 1990s, the community of Aspen voted almost 60-40 to use the Meralt property for an unrestricted 4-lane that came all the way up from Basalt. It was 1 EIS, Basalt up. But Mayor Bennett came to office, and I had served on the Clean Air Board, knew of a federal policy that said there shall not be any federal fund spent on a project in a PM10 non-attainment area, which we were. It was called conformity. We're not a non-attainment area now, though, because we've beat back that problem. But that was enough to throw the Colorado Department of Highways, which was transitioning into the Department of Transportation, into a bit of a tizzy. And the federal legislation for ICE-T, the Inner Surface Transportation Efficiency Act, had just passed, and we were able, during the 90s, to develop a new entrance to Aspen and a new basalt to buttermilk that included park and ride lots for the first time on the west slope, and included west HOV lanes on the west slope, which unfortunately, when EOTC found they couldn't fund them, neither Aspen, Snowmass, or Picken County was willing to fund the enforcement of HOV lanes. I'm here today because there's a history that was built upon by one council after another. We spent years till we getting the 1998 approvals, and those came with a serious continuation of transportation demand management measures, such as paid parking. And we saw then later the roundabout built after the RTA was formed in the year 2000 when I was mayor. And we sold the entire valley on a plan that we could manage future traffic growth. That continued with the 2007 bus lane vote for the open space to build the bus lanes, to the new Marine Creek Bridge being built and the roundabout. And then sometime in the mid-teens, under the leadership of Mayor Skadron and Picken County Commissioner George Newman, we were able to secure bus rapid transit and the funding for bus rapid transit throughout our valley. But right now, the City Council is effectively telling CDOT that we need a 4-lane. We just want 2 of those lanes in the morning and 2 of those lanes in the afternoon. And we don't want to have to do NEPA because we know it disadvantages the bus system. The same bus waiting in a single line to come in the afternoons when school's letting out, the other side where the skier traffic is, airport arrivals, those buses are the same ones that need to get to Ruby Park to take people home. And when you need 3 buses to deliver the same service as 2 buses and drivers, it starts to really degrade the system because of the time lost. I would posit that council here is doing nothing to advance mass transit ridership, get more people to leave their cars at Brush Creek, or anything like that. Now, in November of 2021, the federal government passed the Federal Infrastructure and Jobs Act, creating an awful lot of money for roads and for a CDOT that has been bankrupt practically for a long time, because nothing has ever passed since Tabor. This November will mark 3 years since that money passed. And that money will go to projects that have a Nationally Environmental Policy Act approval. Now, I know the Friends of Merle have given you a legal opinion that that won't matter. And who knows, maybe it can go all the way up to the Supreme Court to find out if it matters. Or whether a public open space vote on top of land that has already been mitigated and essentially purchased by CDOT for a transportation corridor will really carry any weight. But those will be exciting issues for the state and for other courts to decide for all of us. But what I'm saying here today is that without a projection of traffic growth and needs 35 years from now and how it affects RAFTA, the hospitals, the schools, and the ambulances, you're not going to jump ahead of the transportation planning regions of which we are a part and only allocate money to NEPA-approved, fully shovel-ready projects. So we're on the road to nowhere, and I have apologies to David Burns. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Come on up. Hi, if you'll start just by stating your name for the record.
My name's Elijah Knight. I'm an 8th grader here at Aspen Middle School. I've lived here my whole life. This summer I will be competing at Nationals for scootering. The skate park at Rio Grande was built in November of 2000. There have not been any modifications or improvements since then. So far this month, the average number of people playing basketball has been 5 to 15 people daily. There have been 25 to 31 people skateboarding and scootering daily. I would like to propose to expand the skate park through the basketball court. There is still a basketball court 0.7 miles away at the Yellow Brick. And that basketball court is so much better for playing than the one at Rio Grande. Because the one at Rio Grande is not at a good location because almost every time my friends and I go to play basketball there, the ball bounces into the river and we are unable to get it back. And the cracks in the court also causes it to bounce away. This project was supposed to happen 10 years ago, but it got canceled. I have talked to numerous skateboarders about expanding it, and they are all in favor for adding rails and a street section to the basketball court. There is no other good street section until Edwards Skate Park in Edwards, which is near Vail. There are a lot of skaters that barely go into the bowl and only hit the 2 little rails in the back of the park. A street section is a different part of skateboarding. It is when skateboarders jump down stairs, hit rails, and other small features. The prices of concrete board rails can vary depending on the quality. By adding a street section, there will be less skateboarders skating around town and getting in trouble for jumping down stuff that they aren't supposed to. Expanding the skate park would give people at the skate park a larger opportunity of what they could do at the skate park. Thank you, and I've gotten over 100 signatures for people at the skate park that want to expand it. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me, and I hope you take this into consideration.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elijah.
Do you want to submit your signatures? Do you
Yeah.
have them with you?
Yeah,
Would you like to leave them with the city clerk?
they're in this folder.
Thank you so much.
And my name's Eric Knight, and I'd just like to voice support for the expansion of a street section at the skate park. I don't know if you guys read the state of play. Have you seen that study from the Aspen Institute about the state of play from youth from here to Parachute? And even in Aspen, like 30% of kids exercise for an hour or more a day. So I think it'd be great to, try to encourage kids to get out and be outside and exercise more.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Council members, that work on a street section of that skate park, it was developed about 10 years ago and then it was not completed and not followed up on. I don't know if there's interest in that direction or if you guys would like any more information about it. Sarah, I'm wondering, necessarily about that whole area, not just the basketball court, but the recycling center as we have it now, and those plans that were shelved about 10 years ago. Do you have any information or kind of what's the status of that area?
At this point, there is no major improvements programmed in the 5-year capital plan for Rio Grande Park of that nature. However, depending upon your decisions related to the Theater Aspen property, that could advance additional capital work more quickly. In addition to that work 10 years ago, there is design work done 6 years ago for realignment for the mountain to the river concept that was under Mayor Scatteron's council when contemplating the Galena Plaza and its design. So Austin, you've got way more detail because I don't remember reviewing the 10-year ago plan, only the 7-year ago plan.
Yeah, and I would have to refresh my memory on the skateboard park portion of that. I was going to add that the Parks and Open Space Department is undertaking a strategic plan currently, and the timing is really ripe to address what the community desires in this location through that process. So.
Yeah, and I'll readily say right now, that was a cutting-edge skate park when it was built. And when you look at more contemporary skate parks today, there's both amenities and safety features we don't have in ours. And so those are things definitely to take under consideration. You council will have the hard decision about, how much of all that land gets programmed for what, because there's a, finite number of square feet down there, and we'll come back to you if you'd like us to bring back that old information. Otherwise, we're watching the Theater Aspen project and its impacts to help us understand if there's a window of opportunity for additional changes to that area.
I would just ask, when you're doing your strategic planning, does an idea like this get conversation? Not necessarily does it get built in, but does it get conversation?
Absolutely. We can build in that opportunity to have a community conversation around this.
So I don't need a request for more information at this time. If you're already in a process that can include this citizen input, and that'd be enough for me at this time. Ward?
Yeah, I was going to ask for just what the plans were 10 years ago, 7 years ago, 6 years ago, whatever, but if you have it on your agenda to look at this, I think it's on the radar screen now, thanks to Elijah, and 100 signatures. So I'm not going to ask for you to dig up the old stuff just to go forward with the new.
Okay.
John?
Yeah, I just want to say thanks for bringing this to our attention, Elijah. I was unaware that the skate park has been there that long. And yeah, I can see how it might be slightly outdated, so I look forward to more information on this.
Great.
So Elijah, if you would introduce yourself to this gentleman that's at the table. I'm going to look to see if Wesley signed this too, if you conned him into it and I didn't know it. That for the rest of you in the room, that's my son, who's a good friend of Elijah's. And, thank you for taking the time to do this tonight.
Thanks, Sarah. Other members of the public for public comment this evening on items not scheduled for our public hearing? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and bring it back to council table, and this is an opportunity for council members' comments. Council members tonight? Sam, start with you.
Just my one comment. Talking about the entrance to Aspen, I'm very adamant about something needs to get done, and I think I've made it clear what I would like to see done. But with that, I want to get an update and ask Sarah, with us putting ballot language on about the affordable housing, real estate transfer tax, and other business, are we in a position to potentially have a ballot question in November regarding the entrance to Aspen? Or is there something that we need to do beyond what we've already done?
Couple of things. First of all, the council determines number of ballot questions it wishes to place, and that's all done through a vote process. As for drafting language of what a question would be, I would need more guidance from the council, and truly it's Jim who would need that more than me, to draft what that question would, how it would be stated, because we'd likely state a few versions of it for your review, and additional for outside legal counsel assistance that we typically use when we're drafting ballot questions. So in terms of timeline, your second part is that on the long range calendar, it's early August. Just checking the date real quick.
It's August 5th.
Thank you. August 5th is the follow-up conversation. It's listed as the Castle Creek Bridge feasibility follow-up. So this is the additional work City Council requested in May that we are bringing back to you. In terms of the drop deadline for getting things on the ballot, we have until later in the month of August. However, direction on writing ballot questions will always at the staff level say the sooner the better. And I don't know at this point whether the council, majority of the council would like a scheduled discussion prior to or in conjunction with August 5th about a potential ballot question. At this point, staff has not been preparing anything because we don't have direction from the table to be working on that.
Thank you. And I won't ask for anything formal tonight. I'll give some food for thought, but I feel like, to the rest of the council, I feel like we should have a contingency plan on if we do not come to a consensus or a decision come August 5th. I think we should be prepared for a November ballot question. And I might ask for that formally at a different time. I won't ask for it now. I just want to know that we're set up to be able to do such a thing. But we paid a lot of money for these studies. This issue's been going on for a long time. That bridge definitely needs to be replaced. So I hope we can make a decision based off of the study that comes back to us on August 5th. But like I said, if we can't, I really think we need to send to the voters and make a decision so that bridge gets decided upon as soon as possible for the safety and health of our community.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Sam, I want a couple comments for you on this. One, we're here now at this stage of this because you and Bill were elected to council. And so this council has slowed down the work that we were doing on moving forward with some plans on that in order to allow you and Bill and the community to have some input. So, you know, I've heard you say recently something about kicking the can down the road or not making decisions and stuff, but truly this is the process to allow you to participate fully in this issue. I personally think that when it comes to a local issue like this, I would prefer to see this on our March ballot instead of our November ballot. But I will also tell you that it has been my desire all along to send something to the voters. I do think the voters should have a choice and a voice in this. I don't think that necessarily us as 5 city council members should be determining the future of this project. So I am more than supportive of having something that we could send to the voters. I think timing is important. For me, a local municipal election in March would be the appropriate time over the November because November is just going to be crazy. So I support the electorate being able to weigh in on this. I don't know that we have gotten to a point where we have solutions or opportunities or choices that we could frame in a ballot question method right now. But as we get to August 5th, then we're going to get ever closer to it. I, for one, am very proud of the previous council that even decided to take this issue up. You know, this has been a community discussion for decades. And the fact that we are even embarking on trying to come up with some solutions that do satisfy our community needs, I think is just really wonderful that we're doing it. But I also really think that we need to be very cautious, very careful, and make the right decisions. So I don't want to hurry to anything, but I am supportive of getting to a vote at some point. I would like that as the path.
Yeah, and I would respectfully agree to disagree on a few points, just because I do think November has the highest level of turnout. I think it's somewhat unfair to put a potential new council in the position to have to deal with the aftermath of a vote. I think we've worked hard on it. I feel like it should be this council that has to deal with it, hence why a November election makes a lot of sense to me. And I do believe time is of the essence, even though I know you say things have been slowed down, because Bill and I came on, but I mean, we're talking about a bridge that is only going to last so much longer, so.
I'm aware. I've been sitting here.
No, and I'm not trying to be insulting here. I'm trying to be productive and trying to get to a contingency plan if we're not able to make a decision as an elected body on our August 5th.
Thanks. Ward, comment?
Yeah, I think Sam and Bill got on council already taking a position for the S-curves before all of the studies were done and before there was a thorough vetting of both of the options. Last time I spoke to you, Sam, you said that you wanted the city council to make the decision and not to be a vote. I've always felt that a decision of this magnitude requires a vote. I have not seen the results of the study that was commissioned in May that we will see in August. I think we have to have all of the data in front of us, and I can tell you right now, I'll never support a 3-lane entrance. It has to be 4 lanes. And if you can find a way to put 4 lanes at the S-curves, I'll entertain it. But I want to look at all the information available, and I think putting on a November ballot is perhaps rushing it.
I'd like to respond by just saying I did not come onto council with any preconceived notions of what I was going to do with this, and when I'm talking about it, I talk strictly about a contingency plan if we're not able to come to a consensus as a council.
Thanks. Any other comments, Sam?
No, that's it.
Thank you. John?
Council comments. I think I'll just merge this with my board report since so let me start over. I went down to a Colorado Municipal League conference last week for 4 days, and one of the more interesting sessions I attended was put on by the Estes Valley Volunteer Fire Department. Now, Estes Park has endured several big fires over the last few years, and one of the biggest was the Troublesome, which actually started in Grand County, advanced 18 miles in one day, jumped the Continental Divide, which everybody in the fire community had assumed would never happen, and they had never planned for it to happen, and so they were surprised by this. And when I say jump the Continental Divide, it means it jumped 1.5 miles of tundra where nothing there was flammable. That's a long way for embers to travel, and obviously it caught everybody off guard. Now, what concerned me most about what I learned was evacuation times. Evacuation times have basically been calculated at 1,000 people per hour for each lane of traffic. And at the end of the session, I asked the chief of the fire department there how long it took them to evacuate Estes Park, and they had to evacuate it multiple times over the last 10 years. He said it was between 3 and 5 hours, and he asked what our evacuation time was. I was unsure at the time, and I said 20. He said that's unacceptable. Now, what I found out today is the current estimate to evacuate Aspen with 40,000 people on a fairly busy summer weekend is 13 hours. The Estes Park Volunteer Fire Department said 5 hours is too much. You should be aiming for 3 hours or less. So this has me gravely concerned about whenever I drive into town through the S-curves, I look up at Shadow Mountain and see all the dead trees that are growing up there and fires that have burned in Glenwood Springs, Basalt, and currently one is still burning over in Twin Lakes. These events give me pause and make me think more about evacuation routes and the safety of our community. Thanks.
Thanks, John. Ward, comments this evening?
Yeah, this dovetails nicely with John's comments. I attended the fire station, or fire preparedness for wildfire. I think it was don't be scared, be prepared. And I thought the number that I remembered that an AI study did for a 17-hour evacuation from town, that's unacceptable. You look at the amount of fuel that's on the Hunter Creek towards the smuggler side and all the beetle kill. We have a tremendous amount of fuel for fire. So I encourage people to get in touch with the fire department. There's a free assessment for around your house for hardening and making it as fire resistant as possible. They also were talking about a 72-hour survival kit that you can have in your go bag. It's available on Amazon, but the fire department also has a list of those items that you should put in your go bag for survival. This is 72 hours of food for one person and a number of other articles that were deemed to be important for survival in a fire situation. If there is a fire, or perhaps when there is a fire, that evacuation may not be the best possible scenario. Perhaps going to a safe place. Rio Grande, Wagner, downtown where the stone buildings are, the golf course are all mentioned as places that are survivable in a wildfire. This is something that also comes into play with the number of lanes we have exiting town on the new entrance to Aspen, which on the other end of it is the exit of Aspen. So I encourage people to contact the fire department to be aware of what your options are and have a plan where your family's going to meet inside or outside the house, where they're going to meet in the neighborhood, and if they get displaced, where they're going to meet down valley or someplace other than Aspen, so that if there is a emergency like this, you don't have to be stressing about where your husband is or who your wife is or your dog, to get everybody together in a spot outside the house, in the neighborhood, and down valley away from the fire. I think that's the extent of my comments for this evening.
John?
I'd like to add 2 more comments about fire. I'm not sure if everybody's aware of this, but Ruidoso, New Mexico just was recently completely evacuated, a similar sized community to ours. It was engulfed by 2 converging fires, and a very similar community, resort community in the mountains, around 7,000 to 8,000 people. And lastly, I just learned about this today, on the Aspen Volunteer Fire Department's website, there is, I haven't used it yet, but I've heard there's a place where you can put your address into the website and find out what is the estimated time of evacuation for your property. I think everybody would be well served by checking out the Volunteer Fire Department's website.
Just one more comment. When I spoke with the assistant chief of the fire department, indicated that scenarios indicate for the first couple of hours there's not going to be a lot of evacuation, and they recommended, if you see smoke, evacuate.
Is there a desire by this council to get more information around wildfire in our area? You know, I think that us talking about some of these things are great, but without kind of ideas, solutions, suggestions, I feel like we're just fanning the flames, pun intended. So there was a wildfire planning session over at the firehouse on Saturday. Ward, did you attend?
Yeah, that's where I got my information.
Sam, were you there for that? John? No. Neither was I. So if there's a desire by this council to get more versed or get more information about how wildfire may affect our area and our community, I'm happy to start working on getting that scheduled for us. Is that something that folks want?
I'd be interested.
I'd like to see information from the fire department.
Okay.
I think education is really important.
Okay, I appreciate that. Sarah, I just work with you a little bit on just some information. I just hate for us to be up here talking about stuff in such blanket, big picture stuff. This is something that definitely is important to our community, and we should be looking at, you know, actual understanding of the dynamics a little better, I think.
happy to. The proper website for wildfire information for Pickens County is pickenswildfire.com. The event on Saturday was put together by a combination of fire department and law enforcement departments here in the county. There is a lot of information already out there. For example, we continue to work on the fire resistance ignition web resources, putting all that information into one page. I'll be honest with you, I think the most important actions by council continue to be to look at your land use code, including your historic preservation regulations for defensible space and proper materials given the increased risk compared now to the 1800s, for example. And then the second recommendation I would have for this group is continue to look at, because it is your responsibility to provide infrastructure to address these situations. So that is a combination of understanding that our potable water system is not a firefighting system in the community. So what are the other alternatives that you're addressing for that? And for example, we have one small reservoir. Otherwise, we're trying to get into reservoirs at other places that we do not control. And then also, as mentioned tonight, you oversee the infrastructure that would be utilized in an evacuation scenario. Thanks.
I would just like to put those in attendance and online a little bit of comfort in the degree of cooperation between the first responders up and down this valley and throughout the state is phenomenal, and the degree of cooperation for Lake Christine fire. Hospital, police, sheriff's department, municipalities, up and down the valley and throughout the state with their cooperation to give assistance is just phenomenal. So know that the community and our first responders communicate well with each other, and they go through these scenarios, so we are not woefully unprepared.
Thank you for that. A couple words from me. I've got some city announcements to share with the community. Aspen 360 is back. This used to be called the Citizens Academy, but it's Aspen 360 now. It's an immersive, informative program. It goes from August to October. There are still a few spaces available, and applications are taken until July 1st. If you're interested in participating in Aspen 360, which is a great way to get to know more about your city government as well as your city and community. And you can log on to aspen.gov for more information. The Wheeler Executive Director Candidate Meet and Greet. There is a meet and greet for the 3 finalist candidates for the Executive Director position at the Wheeler Opera House. This is going to take place on July 10th from 5 to 6:30 p.m. It's an opportunity to meet the 3 finalist candidates and just get to know them a little bit better and find out a little bit more as the city moves towards naming a new executive director. Free irrigation assessments. This summer, the city of Aspen is offering free irrigation assessments in an effort to conserve water and provide great lawn care advice. Participants will receive an assessment report with recommended improvements. If you make the improvements, the city can rebate you up to $2,500 for your irrigation at your home. Once again, you can, best way is to actually contact Caroline Moore, and that's at Moore, M-O-O-R-E, at aspen.gov. Citizen survey. Right now, we do have a citizen survey out. It starts July 1st, and that again is available on our website, aspen.gov. And we ask as many people to take the survey as we can. This is actually very valuable information for all councils as we look to prioritize some of the things that we're doing. We do that based on some of the comments that we get through the citizen survey. Wanted to let you know that there's an update to the city's non-discrimination ordinance. The city is updating its non-discrimination ordinance. It was first adopted in 1977. Quite a progressive move in the state at the time. But over the past year, we've undertaken a comprehensive effort to modernize the ordinance. We will be discussing that at a work session on August 12th. We obviously would love any public feedback, and that one is available on aspencommunityvoice.com. And lastly, new electric vehicle charging stations at Coke Park. There are 2 new electric vehicle charging stations over at Coke Park. 4 new charging plugs are operational. 2 spaces which are ADA van accessible. Something that's interesting is that Aspen boasts the highest number of EVs, electric vehicles, per capita in the state of Colorado. And therefore, our city's EV public charging infrastructure calls for us to install quite a number of them. Right now, we're at 23. We seek to almost double that over the next few years, but nonetheless, the newest ones are available, and they are at Coke Park. One more thing.
Where on July 10th, the meet and greet, where is that going to be?
It is at the Wheeler Opera House lobby.
Thank you.
Other announcements that I have is tomorrow is the Lawn Bash at the Red Brick. This is put on by Aspen Public Radio and the Red Brick Center for the Arts. Come on by. It is from 4 to 6 o'clock tomorrow. The Red Brick had some new renovations done to it as well. There's a great new art exhibit up. So come by the Red Brick tomorrow for a very interactive community time. That's 4 to 6 tomorrow. I also would like to make an announcement about an event on Thursday going on 4 to 6 at the Benedict Music Tent. It is a celebration of Pride Month here in Aspen. Once again, this is just a great opportunity to connect with members of your community. It is food, drink, and fun. A lot of booze will be set up as well, and a good chance to just mingle and get to know your neighbors if you don't already know them. Looking at the folks that are in this room right now, I think you all know your neighbors. Those are my comments this evening, and that'll bring us to City Manager's comments tonight.
Good evening, Council. A few quick things to get us going. Also, don't forget, July 4th is not that far away.
Oh, yeah, that.
So we will have quite the bash in town with a few new elements. I'm just going to tell you about one of them. And that is that we are going to the people to vote on the best of for the parade this year. And so please help us out. There'll be QR codes all over town that allow people to cast their vote for their favorite parade entries, so we can recognize those folks for their creativity and performance and other things that they bring to that parade. I will just send you an email later too with a few more technical details of the event closer to the event. I also wanted to give you a quick update on the Lumberyard Affordable Housing Project. A couple interesting things all happening at the same time. First is, I just want to let you know, we will be back at your next work session, which isn't until July 8th, so you've got a week off here with the holiday. And on July 8th, we will be doing an in-depth update of just where things are at with design work. We will provide you some update as well about the RFQ process and where we are in that, and be available to take any questions you have as we're going through the design phase right now. A couple other things is just want to let you know that also then on the 9th, staff and counselors are invited as well. We'll be meeting with Representative Valesco at the site to talk about the project, to help her see the vision the community's established through the entitlement process, just to continue to keep our state representative familiar with the demand and need for this housing as she goes into her next season up on the hill, so to speak, here at the Capitol. The last thing is, just wanted to let you know that I and Chris Everson will be traveling to Montrose later this week. We are presenting the Lumberyard for a facilities infrastructure grant. We've made a $2 million ask of the state in this process, and he and I will be presenting on that grant request as DOLA is sorting through its decision-making. That particular funding is a ongoing funding source in the state. It is not one-time dollars either. So we applied last year, got some feedback. The big one was you need entitlements before we can really consider this as a project that's viable. And now that we have those, we're hopeful to make a compelling case on the community's behalf. The next thing I just have for you real quick is I'll also be sending you an email, or probably Jen Uten on my behalf, about just a few changes. Our new executive assistant in the manager's office will be starting on July 1st. Her name is Gracie Palmino. And there's some things that you've been relying on Natalie for. We want to help pull some of that back so Natalie can focus more heavily again onto the grants program as her primary responsibility. And so Jen will be your contact point as we're working on training Grace over the next 2 months. If you could please continue to work through Jen on those typical administrative tasks that you would use that assistant to support you in. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Any board reports?
We had an action meeting.
I missed it because I was at
You were at
CML.
CML, and I wish I had been there as well, but next time, maybe. Well, I won't be around next time, so never mind. We had discussions about the IGA. We had discussions about the IGA that had come before this council in a work session, and looking at if there was support on the board to dive into the IGA, intergovernmental agreement between APSHA, the city, and the county. And there was, we discussed what the current structure is, how well it seems to be working, and the lack of support at the work session for bringing this to APSHA. And the decision was made at APSHA that we would not open up the IGA again at this point. We do have a 5-year strategic plan update coming up this year that we'll have to work with the executive director and Sarah to get that 5-year plan done. One of, a citizen was talking about the cost of repairs at BG1, and this really covers, it goes over all of the workforce housing programs where it costs so much money because somebody in BG1 or any of the workforce housing projects is going to be competing against the contractors that are doing business in the West End and Red Mountain, and it's very difficult to get reasonable wages. We had reasonable estimates. We had some discussions about what we could maybe do. One of the things that was suggested is that when the next round of the grant program, that perhaps to wait until all the window contracts or all the people that want new windows, and then perhaps seeing if APSHA can get a better deal by pooling the resources or pooling the requests. We have a new outreach coordinator, Meg Simon. I think that pretty much covers what the highlights of that meeting were.
Thanks, Ward. One quick comment for you. You know, in light of the fact that the IGA was not voted to bring back for further discussion or changes or in-depth discussion, you know, I continue to advocate for the APSHA board to continue to refine the rules and regulations so that they are in keeping with APSHA board members' expectations on both what those rules and regulations are, as well as how they are complied with and enforced and such. You know, I think there's still some work to do in that area, and in light of not reopening the IGA agreement, I think that, you know, the board has some opportunities to really make sure that what the board is putting forth represents what the board would like.
Yeah, and that's an ongoing process with updating rules and regulations, and if you have specific ideas that you want the board to pursue, and that's something that the board has been able to work with the staff and to get changes and updates and refinements accomplished. So anytime that you have ideas. John and I are your representatives on APSHA, and I think we're having quarterly meetings, hopefully, quarterly meetings to bring all of the city council into line on what's going on at APSHA. So bring those suggestions up at that time or anytime.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Board reports, I would just report that today was a chamber board meeting. We met at the Molly this morning for our first time. We were lucky enough to have Pete Rice from the city giving a presentation around the Castle Creek Bridge and the entrance to Aspen. More than anything, just to clarify kind of what proposals are and what we're waiting for as far as information to come back to us. But it was nice. They did a great job of presenting a very unbiased and factual account of where this project and process is. With that, that'll bring us down to our consent calendar. Consent calendar this evening is resolution number 67, groundwater supply development support for Cozy Point Ranch. Resolution number 68, emergency procurement, electric cable and conduit replacement. Resolution number 71, this is electronic participation. And the draft minutes of May 28th and June 11th. Are there any items that council members need pulled for further discussion? 67. 67 is groundwater supply development support, Cozy Point Ranch.
My question to you guys is, you know, there are two wells, or well two, it looks like the water is not potable or it's real low quality. I'm curious what the quality is on well one, what the production from well one is and how that meets the needs for potable water at Cozy Point Ranch. And the other one is we're asked to support 200,000 plus for more studies. It sounds like we're going to need, depending on what the sufficiency of well one is, that we may need to drill another well, and how this ask at this point would contribute to actually drilling a well, or are we just looking again at the condition of the existing wells?
I'm going to let John take this one. He's got all the details on this project.
Sure. So well number one is a good producer, but it does not produce enough potable water for the entire ranch. Well number two is also a good producer, and to be clear, the water is potable, but the aesthetic quality of it is not attractive to humans or animals. So it's reduced to being used in very limited fashion right now. The potential redrilling for a new well would be a replacement of well number two and the rights that are associated with well number two. The plan that's included here for 200,000 does include some sample wells being drilled. In order to make those fully functional wells, there would be additional funding to, include pumping, et cetera. But this would get us on the way towards that.
Do you have any idea what kind of additional funding is going to be required to re-drill or drill a new well number two?
At this time, we don't know what that total cost would be. It's anticipated that if we are successful with this drilling program, that would get us on the way towards that final well.
And then my final question is, and I have no idea on this, the water rights that are associated with well water. You said that you had rights for well number two and one, but what are the water rights for drilling a well on a property? Do you have to get a special rights for it, or does it come by just owning the property?
Well, in this case, I'm not an expert on this, but you do need a permit to drill a well. In this case, all of the drilling that will take place will be in close enough proximity for the rights from well number two to be directly transferred to this new well.
We'd happy to maybe offline go in a little more detail with you about specifically how that works. As you know, we are pretty stout in maintaining the city's water rights to meet the community's needs. And so it varies a little bit on the placement of the well, but the process is generally the same, and we can go over that process with you offline if it's not necessary to make your vote decision tonight. Thanks.
And just for public information, the irrigation there does not come from well water, it comes from the creek. So when you see that, it's not treated water.
That's correct. It comes from Brush Creek.
Thank you.
Is it possible to get any more, so Ward asked a question about this $200,000 gets us some test drilling and all, but it doesn't install a new well. What does it cost to install a new well?
I don't have that with me tonight, but I can absolutely get that for you.
And it's highly variable on how deep you have to go, so which we don't know yet. So.
Absolutely. The water table in this area varies quite a bit. And so that is part of what the testing does, is to help assist us in finding places that actually can help reduce our expenses by not needing to build as deep. The second thing that applies into that is the uses it is intended to support. So what's the intensity of use? Because the frequency, because you have to rely on groundwater recharge. So again, we're happy to go into more detail with you all. If the question is only cost, the situation we have is we're the landlord, and we have an obligation to provide water at this facility. And so despite it being an expensive proposition, it's a necessary one to fulfill our landlord responsibilities on the property.
Just follow-up question. Does LRE drill wells? Can we negotiate to get a good deal for finding where it should be drilled and drilling it?
LRE does not drill wells. So as part of this proposal, they're actually going to solicit bids from 3 well drilling companies for that work.
All right. Thank you.
If we have 2 wells that work, but one is still potable, still gives us the quantity that we need, it's not attractive?
So there's a strong sulfur content to the water, and it's unattractive would be the nicest way to put it. The animals won't drink it. We do use it in a couple of the bathrooms.
Okay. All right. Any other questions there?
I think that says it all. For me, if the animals won't drink that water, why would humans?
Sounds like Hartzell.
Okay, thank you, guys.
Thanks.
There's no other questions. I could take a motion for the consent calendar.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
Motion and a second by Sam. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? No, unnecessary. Can we have a roll call vote for the consent calendar, please?
Counselor Doyle,
Yes.
Counselor Hohenstein,
Yes.
Counselor Rose,
Yes.
Mayor Tory.
Yes. The consent calendar passes by a vote of 4-0. No first readings of ordinances this evening, so that brings us right to our public hearing tonight. Our public hearing is ordinance number 7. This is 808 Cemetery Lane.
Before we get going here, I have a disclosure that I drove out there yesterday to see exactly where this maintenance facility is located on the property, how you access it. And when I was there, the caretaker was also there, and he showed me where the proposed workforce housing was going to be. He was unaware of it. He was very supportive of Mr. Stone, and he said if he thinks we need it, we probably need it. So that's the disclosure I had, so everybody has the same information I do.
Thank you. I as well need to disclose that I did a site visit out to Red Butte Cemetery. Mine was today. I as well ran into the on-site caretaker, and he showed me around a little bit, or not showed me around, but pointed things to me and had a brief conversation.
I will add that he disclosed that he has, he probably wouldn't live there, that he has a place in Snowmass.
I would disclose that I have several friends buried out at the Red Butte Cemetery, and I visit there from time to time and know the lay of the land.
Thanks.
Okay, good evening, City Council, Mayor Tory. I'm Jeffrey Barnhill, City Planner, City of Aspen. Today we're going to be talking about Red Butte Cemetery, 808 Cemetery Lane. We're going to start with Alan Richmond, who is the applicant representative. We're going to start with his presentation, and then we'll do staff presentation following that.
Thank you. Alan, do you know how long your presentation is?
I timed it at about 15 minutes.
Thank you very much.
I will be as expeditious as I can, but there's a fair amount to say tonight.
All good, thank you.
For the record, I'm Alan Richmond. I'm representing the Red Butte Cemetery Association. I'd like to ask the members of the Cemetery Association Board to introduce themselves. So I will start by introducing Stoney Davis, the board president. And Stoney, if you could introduce the other members who are here. That's Stoney Davis. He had a medical procedure today and
Would the board stand up, please?
is bleeding a bit.
My name's Mark Thorpe, one of the board members. This is Kevin Haggerty, and then we have these names.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm really glad to hear that the council members have been able to visit the cemetery recently, because I think that one thing that anyone who's been to the cemetery can agree on is that the Red Butte Cemetery is a beautifully maintained historic property. And it's an asset not only to the Cemetery Lane neighborhood, but is a treasured and sacred part of Aspen. The Cemetery Association Board is here with a proposal that's intended to ensure that the historic character of this property can be maintained and enhanced for future generations. Because as you're going to hear tonight, while the cemetery's upkeep has been accomplished for decades by this dedicated group of volunteers who've taken care for and managed this property, in recent years it's become increasingly important to supplement their voluntary efforts with the part-time work of a cemetery employee, the employee that several of you met. So we're asking you to support the cemetery by granting approval for its employee to live within the existing maintenance facility as an on-site caretaker. The members of the Cemetery Association Board are all community volunteers. The maintenance and upkeep of this property is not supported by city taxes. The property may look like a city park, and there have been several letters in your packet that have compared it to a city park, but it's not a city park. This is a privately owned 16-acre property, which has been a cemetery since 1899, many decades before any of the houses were built around it. The cemetery board has never received any money or government funding to operate and maintain this property, and it's not seeking any public funding for the project which is before you tonight. This is an aerial photo showing the cemetery and the surrounding residential areas. It shows the overall layout of the cemetery. The historic portion of the cemetery is the lower half of this photo. This is the area where the plots have been established over the last 125 years and the grid pattern that you're all familiar with. The upper half of the property where the maintenance facility is located, the plots there are only now being established and the street grid is also being established. The photo also gives you a first indication of how distant the maintenance facility is from some of the surrounding uses. I went on to the mapping function and I measured, and the closest house to the west, so the closest house to the left of the facility in the Snow Bunny subdivision is about 380 feet away, so well more than a football field away. And the closest house to the north in Black Birch Estates is about 200 feet away. In the early 2000s, the cemetery board recognized that it was facing quite a bit of deferred maintenance needs with its infrastructure. At the time, the association was storing materials and equipment in a rundown Quonset hut with piles of materials littered around it. And I'm going to show you a picture of that Quonset hut. That's what the area where the maintenance facility is now located looked like in 2007. The board realized that it needed a building where it could store and maintain the equipment it uses to keep the cemetery the beautiful place that we all love. That's what the piles that come from activities like burials and other work around the cemetery, those are the piles of spoils that used to be located next to the Quonset hut. So back in 2009, there was a PUD approval request for a new building, which the council approved. The design of the building was intended to keep the building purposefully small. It's just over 1,300 square feet in size. The building was placed in the rear of the cemetery. I'll go in the other direction. The building was placed in the rear of the cemetery so it wouldn't impact the historic front section. The building contains a 950 square foot garage workspace and a 350 square foot office / kitchen / bathroom space. It's got a concrete apron in front of it and cribs for material storage. The building and the storage areas have organized and cleaned up what was previously the messy eyesore that we showed you before. This is what it looks like today. I think it's pretty clear that it was an enormous improvement at the time, and the cemetery board is quite proud of what was accomplished with that activity. So, the cemetery has had one part-time employee for many years. In 2014, several years after the maintenance facility was built, the Cemetery Association applied to the city to convert the office space within the facility into a living, sleeping space for that employee. The City Council approved that request. In doing so, the City Council repealed the condition in the 2009 approval ordinance, which said that, and I'm quoting, "The maintenance facility shall not be used as a living unit or a place to sleep overnight." So while it's correct that at one time the city prohibited the space from being a living unit, that prohibition was lifted in 2014. The council replaced that condition with a new set of limitations, stating that the unit would be the sole dwelling unit permitted on the property and could only be occupied by the employee working for the Cemetery Association. The city also limited that approval to a conditional one-year trial. Over the course of the next year, the employee occupied the space periodically. At the end of the year, the association did not come back to the city for a renewal of the use. So again, it was a one-year conditional approval. Since the use was not renewed, Ordinance 30 of 2014 stated that subsequent use of the maintenance building as sleeping quarters is prohibited unless approved by the city pursuant to the land use code. Now, if that condition had been written to say, "Thou shalt not come back and apply for housing on this property ever again," we wouldn't be here tonight. But it doesn't say that. Instead, it describes what the applicant would need to do to request a housing unit here, unless approved by the city pursuant to the land use code. And the council members, I think, are well aware that it's not unusual for applicants to come back in and ask for amendments to prior approvals or conditions of approval. That happens around here all the time. That doesn't mean that the applicant was lying to the public. It doesn't mean that the commitments that were made didn't mean anything at the time, or that the applicant can't be trusted. It means that things happen in our world, things change, and every day things happen, and sometimes that leads to the need for amendments. With housing becoming an increasingly difficult problem in the Upper Valley, and with the city placing an emphasis on creating new housing and having partners in the public and private sector contributing to the housing solution, the cemetery board felt that this was an appropriate time to revisit the issue. This slide shows what the space looks like today. Those of you who were there recognize this. This is basically the front half of the space. It's the office portion. The back portion of the space is where there's a small kitchen, a small bathroom, there's a shower in there. The space in total is about 350 square feet, and I think it should be fairly obvious, the most you could ever put in this space is one person. So why does the association need this unit now? There are a number of reasons that we would put forth to you. First of all, having a unit on site will help the association to recruit and keep an employee in the coming decades. Second, having a unit on site is also important for security reasons. There has been occasional vandalism at the maintenance facility. I read something today in the packet about vandalism to graves that I wasn't aware of, but vandalism in cemeteries is not a unique thing, and having someone on site will be a deterrent to that happening. Third, because this position is not a full-time, 40-hour-per-week, year-round job, the person who fills it would not qualify for a traditional APCHA housing unit. So the association can't depend on being able to have this person be housed in an off-site deed-restricted unit. And finally, there needs to be somebody available to help the cemetery, at the cemetery, when there's a burial scheduled or when maintenance issues arise with short notice. At one time, many of the Cemetery Association board members lived close to the cemetery, and they could run over and do these tasks. Now, as has become quite common in Aspen, most board members live down valley or they're at a distance from the cemetery. So they need an employee on site who can be there to meet those immediate kinds of needs. How has this been designed to be an appropriate use for the site? The letters in your packet have suggested that the proposed housing unit will be incompatible with the cemetery's serene historic character and cause unacceptable impacts to the neighbors. We disagree with that for the following reasons. No outside changes to the maintenance facility are proposed at this time. None. We've proposed nothing happen outside. The building will be unchanged from what it looks like today, except for the fact, as you will hear during the staff presentation, there will be landscaping planted around the building to comply with a condition that was previously applied by the city in the 2014 approval, and which, to be honest, has not been complied with to date. So that will be complied with. Secondly, the structure, as I said before, is located at least 200 feet from the nearest residence to the north. This is the 380 feet or so to the residence to the west. That's the distance to the north. Third, the unit's only 350 square feet in size and can only accommodate a single person. Fourth, the cemetery board will write restrictions into the unit's lease to ensure that nuisances do not occur from this occupancy. These restrictions will control lights and noise, prohibit outside parties, and ensure that the occupants' activities do not disrupt the serenity of the cemetery. Who is more concerned about the serenity of the cemetery than these volunteers who have been working and maintaining this property for decades? Because the occupant will be the board's employee, the board is the best entity to ensure that disturbances do not happen. And finally, at first reading, the question came up of whether this proposal would be a first step towards additional affordable housing units being proposed here. Our response to that question is an emphatic no. All development on the cemetery property requires PUD review and approval, so the city controls its future development. Moreover, the applicant would be quite comfortable with the council restating within this ordinance the condition that was applied to the property in the 2014 ordinance. It said the unit shall be the sole dwelling unit permitted on the property. This would make that a condition of the current PUD on the property, making it more clear that no additional units would be allowed. It's been suggested that the proposal to allow a caretaker unit would violate the underlying zoning. That's not correct. It's true that the property is zone park. It's also true that the park zone district does not list a cemetery as an allowed or as a conditional use, although it does list a park maintenance facility as a conditional use. That's how the maintenance facility was approved back in 2009. There's only one zone in the city of Aspen that I'm aware of that does allow a cemetery, and that's the conservation zone district. But that's not the zone that the city applied to this property many years ago. Despite those facts, the application before you tonight does not request any change to the park zoning designation of this property, nor would it violate the city's zoning regulations. That's because this application requests a use variation. Use variations are expressly allowed in the plan development section of the code. Section 26.445.60 of the code allows the city to vary uses in a PUD. It says a development application may request variations in the allowed uses permitted in the zone district. That's what's in front of you tonight. We're not applying to change the zoning. It'll remain zone park. What we're asking you to do is vary the uses allowed in the park zone to make affordable housing a use allowed in the PUD for this property. If you grant that variation, the use would be allowed. If you don't, then there won't be housing on this property. Section 26-445-60 goes on to set standards an applicant must meet in order to obtain the variation. These standards address the compatibility of the proposed use with other uses in the project and the surrounding neighborhood, and whether its location, size, and design minimizes adverse effects. Our presentation tonight is focused on why we believe this use will be compatible and how its design does minimize adverse impacts. That's why the Community Development Department memo concludes that we comply with these standards, and it's why staff supports the requested PD use variation, and we appreciate their support greatly. My final comment, we've been asked whether this will set a precedent for other city park properties. It's been suggested that allowing a caretaker unit in the cemetery will open the door for similar applications to be approved in other city parks and public open space properties. However, a careful look at several other city parks demonstrates that this precedent was set many years ago. In fact, there's a one-bedroom unit in the city parks office complex located within the golf course, which is just down the street from the cemetery. There's a two-bedroom unit at Island Park, which is attached to the Arc. That's one of the most heavily utilized public parks in the city. I haven't heard anything to indicate that that unit has changed or negatively affected the park's character. And Anderson Park along Cooper Avenue contains a small house which was the home of Hilda Anderson. It's now used as housing for a parks employee. So the precedent of having an on-site caretaker within treasured city open spaces was set long ago, and I don't see that it's caused any harm to any of those spaces. So in summary, the Cemetery Board is asking for your support for this unit so that they can continue to operate and maintain this beautiful historic cemetery in the manner to which we've all become accustomed. Having a cemetery in town where residents can pay their respects to deceased relatives and friends is a key element that keeps Aspen a real community and not just a resort. As all of you are very well aware, creating affordable housing is a difficult, contentious, and costly endeavor. By granting this approval, you'll create an affordable housing unit at no financial cost to the public. We respectfully request that the City Council follow the recommendation of HPC and the Community Development Department by approving Ordinance 7. Thank you for your consideration of this request.
Thank you.
I hope I didn't take too long.
Thank you. Stoney, are you okay?
Yeah,
Okay,
I had Mohs surgery
I understand. Okay,
times, and it's just, it doesn't hurt, it's still dead.
okay.
I can't hear it.
Gotta love it.
Okay, thank you.
He's a trooper.
Staff presentation? And maybe it's appropriate for any immediate questions. Does anybody have any clarifying questions for the applicant's presentation?
Yeah.
Just on the presentation part, and then we'll come back after staff presentation.
Yeah.
If you have a question that you want clarified.
Well, now you switched it over. I wanted more clarification on the 2014 approval and understanding. I'm trying to follow along. It was, in 2008, it sounds like there was no intention of building housing and housing was not allowed.
Yes.
In 2014, you went back to get it to be, not to be housing, but so that could be housing at some point. I'm reading something here, an email from a constituent talking about some quotes. The applicant is not proposing a housing unit. You saying is not their intent to make it into a permanent residence. The deed restriction requires it not to be a primary residence. And I guess my question and concern here is, even though you always can apply and come back to these things, it sounds like it has been the potential slippery slope of you coming back in 2014, making it sound like it's not going to be housing, and now we're back in 2024 and you're asking for housing.
Yeah, no, I can certainly respond to that question.
Yeah.
So when we first applied, all the way back in 2007, the original design had the same 1,300 square foot maintenance facility that ended up getting built. And attached to it, we proposed a 1,500 square foot, two-bedroom housing unit that would have been a deed-restricted housing unit. That was met with extreme resistance, not just from the neighbors, but the HPC was very uncomfortable with it, and ultimately the council was uncomfortable with it. So that was withdrawn from the application, and the approval which was granted by council in 2009 was just for the 1,300 square foot maintenance facility. And yes, you'll see comments by us saying, we understand there's all sorts of resistance to this, and we're not proposing a housing unit. By 2014, yes, the RBC said, we want to come back in, and we'd like to have the ability for our employee to live there. Now, the employee that they had in 2014 was kind of a unique character. He lived permanently out of the valley, and he commuted to Aspen in the summer and the winter. In the winter, he was an employee of the ski company, I believe, and in the summer, he worked on the cemetery property. So he really just needed a place to crash, if you will. He needed a place when he was in Aspen from time to time. He was not looking for it to be his full-time housing unit. And so that's what we proposed to the city. But as we went through the process, and you start to face what does it take in the building code and in all the city's health and occupancy codes for someone to live and reside in a unit, it became, by definition, a dwelling unit. We could not do anything to avoid it. So we in the end agreed that it was to be a dwelling unit. It would have a deed restriction on it. The key limitation was the council said, we're not prepared to make this a permanent housing unit out there. We got to see how this works. So they put a 1-year conditional trial on it, and they said, yes, he can sleep there as much as he wants during the year. We'd like to see quarterly reports, which Stoney prepared about the unit. We'd like you to meet with the neighbors and see if there are complaints about it. But he was not going to live there as a full-time occupant. Now, since that time, that person no longer comes up to the Roaring Fork Valley, I believe. He is not the employee of the association any longer. They have a part-time employee, and we're kind of looking to the future. I mean, if you saw the folks that stood up tonight, none of us are really young kids anymore. And we're trying to make sure that this place will be cared for into the future. So this is as much looking to the future as it is trying to take care of that individual who does have a unit in Snowmass and may not need this facility right now. But we thought that with the city looking at housing in the way it is, this would be well received. We understand how controversial it's become.
Yeah, and that's what I'm just trying to understand, and just want you to know, change is the only constant. I understand you're doing
Yes.
everything within your right, but I also empathize with the neighbors who felt like they were promised that housing was never going to go there. Obviously, never was probably not the word that was ever used, but it was never the intention, and then it was ... at the time, and now we're in the new time. So that's
Yeah.
my question for now.
And as I said in my written response to you folks, these points were brought up in 2014. They were brought up very directly, and the council at that time listened to both sides and said, we understand what was said in 2009, and we respect the need, and we'd like to take a trial run at it. And that's what they did. And after the year, the board decided not to come in and ask for it again. So at this point, it is a prohibited use. Nobody debates that question. The 2014 ordinance makes it very clear, if we didn't come back in, then housing is prohibited unless we get a new approval under the land use code that's in effect today. So it's certainly not approved. We don't have any rights.
Understood, thank you. I'm good for now. I'll wait.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, sure.
Good evening, City Council. Again, this is a review of 808 Cemetery Lane, a Red Butte cemetery requiring a planned development project review amendment, use variation, and growth management quota system review. Here's a quick overview of the site. It is an Aspen Victorian designated property containing a cemetery, a Victorian-era cabin and outhouse, and a non-historic maintenance facility. The applicant requests approval to establish a deed-restricted affordable housing unit on the site in the existing maintenance facility. Here are a few photos. Here are a couple photos of the property from our Aspen Victorian website. The site is a 16.8 acre lot in the Park Zone District with a planned development overlay. If it's all right with you, I think that Alan covered the background pretty extensively on this, so I may go past this if that's all right with council. Here are the plans for the conversion of the unit into a dwelling unit. You will see a proposed kitchen, bed, and other amenities associated with a living unit. This request triggered a plan development amendment to a project review approval. This is needed to memorialize the dimensional standards for the site and is required because of use variation standards. As part of the project review approval, the project must align with City of Aspen values and goals and provide a public benefit. This project aligns with several goals in the Aspen Area Community Plan, namely 1.2, deed-restricted housing units should be utilized to the maximum degree possible. 2.1, the housing inventory should bolster our socioeconomic diversity. 4.2, all affordable housing must be located within the urban growth boundary. And 4.3, on-site housing mitigation is preferred. Essentially, private parties are integral in creating workforce and affordable housing. Currently, the dimensional standards from 2009 are 1,280 square foot maintenance facility with a maximum external floor area ratio of 1,300 square feet and 275 square feet of floor area for the Victorian cabin and outhouse. The proposed dimensional standards are a maximum floor area of 1,300 square feet, comprising of 928 square feet for a maintenance area / workroom and 352 square feet for an affordable housing unit. And the Victorian cabin and outhouse would remain the same at 275 square feet. In staff's review of the growth management quota system, we found that all applicable criteria were either met or not applicable. Because the building is an existing structure that is to be voluntarily deed restricted, there is some discretion in allowable unit size for APSHA. The unit size minimum for a studio is generally 500 square feet. The applicant today requests 352 square feet. The unit will specifically be for the Red Butte cemetery worker. APSHA proposes to waive the minimum number of hours. However, the worker must work the time specified in the application. So spring, summer, fall, and snowplow roads in the winter. Those were what were depicted in the application. The unit will be RO. However, the Red Butte Cemetery Association will not be charging the employee rent and will be paying them an hourly wage. As a planned development, the applicant may request use variations on site. This is not a rezoning of the property, does not allow any additional housing units or any other residential development. The permitted and conditional uses allowed on the property according to its zoning shall be used as a guide, but not an absolute limitation to the land uses which may be considered during review. While residential use is typically not seen in the Park Zone District, there is largely residential zoning directly adjacent to the cemetery, and the property is a planned development. The highlighted areas there are residential development in the area directly next to the cemetery. The proposed change will directly support the maintenance and upkeep of the cemetery. Location, size, design from an exterior will not change, minimizing adverse effects on surrounding properties and the neighborhood. The operating characteristics will remain largely unchanged. The employee has been using this facility while they are working. And again, it fulfills some of the criteria outlined in the 2012 Aspen Area Community Plan. So in historic preservation, there is a term as period of significance. Period of significance is defined by the length or period of time when a property was associated with important events, activities, or persons, or attained the characteristics which qualify it for designation. Although general practice for Aspen Victorian Resources has been to identify the period of significance as around 1904, cultural landscapes are a little bit different than buildings as they develop more over time. The Red Butte Cemetery was established in 1899, with the first interment occurring in October of that year, allowing for a late 19th, early 20th century period of significance. Although cultural landscapes develop over time, that does not mean that their full history contributes to their significance. The intent of the cemetery, and a common occurrence across cemeteries during that time in the United States, was to have an on-site caretaker. From our historic preservation team, indeed, the design intent of Red Butte Cemetery, with trimmed lawns, a distinct grid pattern, and rows of trees, provided for a more manicured cemetery requiring a more robust maintenance plan. A live-in caretaker, also known as a sexton, has been an intentional and integral part of the Red Butte Cemetery since its inception. The property was developed with the house of the sexton on its ground, where he lived all year. An on-site caretaker lived on this property prior to any other substantial development in the area, longer than any of us were alive. The article on the screen from 1901 states, "On Evergreen Avenue and this ground, the house of the sexton stands facing the entrance to the cemetery. The house of the sexton is located on the grounds, as before stated, and he lives in the house all the year." As exemplified by Ute and Aspen Grove cemeteries, preserving inactive historic cemeteries is cumbersome. Maintaining vegetation, managing visitors, and mitigating climate-caused deterioration in an active historic burial ground without hastily adding to the damage takes time and dedication. A live-in caretaker on the site has the possibility of preserving the historic integrity of this precious cultural landscape in the city of Aspen. Interestingly enough, there also was a Sexton's Lodge at Aspen Grove Cemetery when it was first constructed. This is an article from the Aspen Daily Chronicle from September 28th, 1889. And it states, "Entering the gates, the Sexton's Lodge is situated to the left of the avenue. Even now, it is recognized that cemeteries, particularly historic cemeteries, can be difficult to maintain for various reasons. The National Park Service recognizes this in their Preservation Brief 48, dedicated to the preservation of grave markers in historic cemeteries. The article on the right, I believe, was for, I think it was Ute Cemetery at the time. So the community sort of understands how difficult it can be to maintain historic cemeteries. Some clarifications on this property. This is a private property. This is not a public park. The city is not the applicant. Staff agrees that the unit size is generally below what would be accepted by APSHA, but APSHA does have some leeway in existing structures that are voluntarily deed restricted. Staff believes that if people are concerned about the size, that maybe the applicant could potentially make this building even larger. This is a cemetery in the Park Zone District. That does not mean that it is a park. I've listed out some of the cemeteries and parks on that lower list. Aspen Grove Cemetery is zoned R15 with an HP overlay. Koch Park is zoned R15. Snyder Park is zoned AH, and the list goes on. And as Alan pointed out, the only zone district where a cemetery is an allowed use is in the Conservation Zone District, which also would allow by right a detached single-family residence. In the end, this is a voluntary deed restriction by a private party on private property. With that, HPC recommended approval, unanimous approval, 6-0. They did add a condition about the landscaping being consistent with the original approvals. I actually finally found the original approvals from 2010. So staff is going to be holding the cemetery to those approvals. Staff recommends council adopt the attached ordinance based on the criteria, recommending approval of the request to establish a deed-restricted affordable housing unit on site in the existing maintenance facility. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any immediate questions for staff?
I do.
Ward.
concerned with the precedent, possible precedent of a PD with a housing on Park Zone. I think Island Park has, is zoned park, but there is a PD that allows, and there is a housing unit there.
Yeah, so the PD allows for the use variation, for them to request the use variation.
Yeah, the key here is that these are all with PDs, that the uses are determined by what the PD is. All kinds of things are determined by what the PD is. And as has been pointed out, PDs have changed with time. Anderson Park, it's a teeny little park, it's not even marked. I was down there today and I couldn't see that there was a livable structure there. Question about the parks, or the Parks Department unit, is that zoned park and has a PD on it as well?
At the golf course?
At the golf course, yeah.
At the golf course or at Anderson Park?
No, at the golf course.
I believe that that is a utilized unit by a Parks employee.
But is it a PD?
It is part of the larger PD that covers the golf course and Truscott.
So if this were allowed, it would not set a precedent of a PD on a park zone having a workforce housing.
I understand the question about precedent. I will say that the good thing about PDs, I think, when you're proposing a change, is that it gives you some flexibility to ask for it. The bad thing about PDs is once you ask for it and you get that, it locks things in, and it requires a fundamentally different process to get something beyond that. I think staff's recommendation on this and acknowledgement of the use of employee housing on other parks that have PDs on them and parks that do not have PDs on them is that those have specific approvals. They are conditioned. They are limited in scope. And so, I think as the conversation goes, this is an accessory use to the primary use of this particular park. And that's generally the way that we see affordable housing units that are associated with, as accessories to the kind of primary uses on these parks.
And in my site visit, I realized that you have to go through the whole cemetery to get to the maintenance facility. Is there any possibility of access through Overlook Drive or Black Birch Drive?
I'm not sure.
Okay, because this seems to be kind of landlocked with only one way in.
There's not access through there.
I know there is not, but I know that the roads stop shy of that property, and my question was, is it possible to gain access through the extension of either of those?
It could be possible. I think probably neighbors and community development and city engineering would not encourage that.
Okay. And the trees and landscaping that were promised 14 years ago are going to be installed or taken care of if this were to be approved?
We're entirely in support of that condition. We've been shown a drawing which was prepared way back in 2010 that has serviceberry bushes and oak brush bushes, rather considerable number, and yes.
And that's what HPC was asking as well.
Yeah.
Those are my questions, and I'd like to hear public comment before.
And yeah, I couldn't find that landscape plan until 2 weeks ago, and I finally found it. So that was done after months and months of collaboration with the neighbors on what it would be to shield this facility. There's 60-plus plantings that would be around this facility. It's pretty significant, plus when the cottonwoods eventually make their way down the roads, staff believes that would be significant shielding for this facility.
There was some effort made to do those plantings after the facility was completed, and Stoney tells me that what was planted was eaten by the deer, and unfortunately we didn't replant, we didn't protect, we didn't do the things that you normally would see done to make sure that the landscaping stayed in place. So we're properly chastised by the neighbors and by the staff about this, and we need to make it right.
Thanks. I had a quick, Sam, you referenced an email earlier. Was that an email that the clerk has?
Yeah,
or
it's a
was
public
that-
comment.
Okay. Do you have questions for staff?
Yeah, I think I
Go right
would
ahead.
like. I was wondering, in 2014, could they have banned permanent housing on this property? Could that have been part of the deal of the 1-year agreement? Like, or could they never have banned it?
I would say in the history of Aspen's land use context, there's very little that's set in stone over time. I think our land use code is frequently amended, and I would say that it's a constant for very strongly stated ideas within plan developments to be reconsidered at times. And so, you know, I could see that language being included, and I could also imagine a process where someone could ask for that language to be undone. You know, I think there are other mechanisms that can transpire on a piece of property that do lock things in more effectively, whether they be covenants or deed restrictions, et cetera. But in terms of the land use approvals or anything in the land use code, those things are fluid over time.
Yeah, and with that, there was an answer to a question here in our packet about the amenability of the applicant to propose, to not be allowed to propose additional housing on the site. So like, if this was approved, could it be approved with conditions that this is, the buck stops here, there will be no more? You can't, I mean, you can always come back and ask and people can always undo, but it'd be written in stone that as much as you can, that you can't be like, oh, we want another studio or we want another 2-bedroom or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's what I tried to answer in the memo there is essentially, yeah. So I think one day down the road, 20 years down the road, they could. I don't think staff would support it. I don't think HPC would support it. Council wouldn't support it. The main support for this comes from the fact that there was an on-site caretaker on this site when it was first established. I think anything counter to that isn't supported by any historic documents or any other things. They would have to go back through the whole process to try and make that happen. And I don't see there being support from any of the bodies there to make that finding.
I respect that answer. I just would say, I would think it would be smart to codify it as much as possible if that's the direction that we choose to go.
And we've embraced that condition and would welcome you placing it in the ordinance.
Yeah. And just again, you know, I think it's a reasonable concern. Again, Ben Anderson, Community Development Director. I think it's a reasonable concern. I will say that on a piece of property, to carve out a fundamentally different primary use on a property would be a subdivision, it would be a rezoning, it would be a new plan development, it would be a whole host of very public, very forward land use. That's not what's being proposed here, but I can say unequivocally that the process that we have for doing those kinds of things are robust.
Yeah, I understand that. And then lastly, just before public comment opens, I was just wondering if any neighbors or anyone was going to speak about this, whether they were more upset in the change in requests or if they were actually going to be directly negatively impacted by this being put into place. It's a curiosity of mine if anyone addresses that.
We'll ask each one of them.
Yeah.
We will find that out.
I think they'll volunteer.
John, do you have any questions for staff at this time?
Not really. I want to thank them for a very thorough briefing.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions for both applicant and maybe staff. First of all, are there current hours of operation for the cemetery? Are the gates closed or are people prohibited from going in the cemetery at any hours?
I don't think so. There's no closure.
Thank you.
In fact, someone told me it's quite a popular place for high schoolers to party late at night.
Thank
but
you.
I wouldn't know anything about that.
So you explained that the screening, the vegetation and screening was attempted back in 2014, but was not completed. Regardless of this application this evening, are you intending to do the screening that was asked for in 2014?
I think the staff's going to hold us to that no matter what happens tonight. That's the sense that I've gotten from my conversations with Jeffrey and Ben, and they have every right to expect that. I will say that we got a certificate of occupancy in 2014 without that, so it should have been done. It should have been done after the 2009 approval, and it certainly should have been done after 2014.
And then maybe a question for staff. During 2014, which sounds like the city council, and I was not there at that time, granted a trial, a year-long trial. Was there a file opened for that? Was there any resident or public comment that came in during that one-year trial?
Not to our knowledge.
Then for the applicant, was an extension of that one-year allotment or even following up to get it maybe changed to a permanent decision about residency there? It just wasn't followed up in 2015 because they didn't need it? Or why wasn't an extension or a follow-up done after 2014?
I don't have an answer to that for you.
Okay.
I think we didn't have the votes of council.
So they didn't feel that it would happen.
Okay, I understand. I understand. Okay, just for the record, that was Stoney Davis who was answering the question. And
Stoney has told me that one of the requirements of the 2014 approval was that a quarterly report be prepared on how many days the employee occupied the unit, and there was a requirement for quarterly meetings at the facility that neighbors were invited to attend. And I think he has records. I believe the cemetery still has records from them. I don't know what the situation is with the city's records.
The area where this current warehouse is surrounded by unused land for the cemetery. Is all of that land expected to be plotted? All of that eventually would? Yes.
A lot of people need to die first, fortunately.
So this is what we have from them, from, I believe, the 2009 approval.
Yes.
And so it looks like everything except that sort of directly north of the maintenance facility is not going to be plotted. I don't know if that's changed since then, but that's the read that I get off of this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I had a note here that was just talking about the difference between conservation zoning versus park zoning. Would an alternate process for these guys be, and I'm not suggesting to do it, I'm just asking, could they have come in for rezoning from park to conservation?
You go ahead.
You know, I think the conservation zone's an interesting zone district. We frequently have conversations with people because there's a misunderstanding of what that conservation zone. It was really, from my understanding, and Alan might have background on this because of his previous role with the city when these kinds of things were happening, but it was really kind of a holding zone. And so we see that zone kind of at the base of Aspen Mountain. That's the zoning that was kind of up mountain from the Lift 1 corridor. The interesting thing about conservation is that it has way more development right on it than does the Park Zone District. And so to neighbor concerns about potential future use, the conservation zone is actually much more permissive to things beyond the primary use of this as a park as the community understands it. And so, yes, it is the zone district that allows for cemeteries because I think of the intensity of uses that cemeteries might have. But in terms of the broad range of permitted and accessory and conditional uses that are on the conservation zone district, it's a much more permissive zone district for different things to be on the property.
I mean, the conservation zone's a lot like county zoning. It's 2-acre zoning, which is you know, like twice the size of, the biggest city zone district is like R30,000. So it's a much more low density, but as Ben says, it allows a free market residence. So it would be a curious fit as well. It's not the right zone, but it's the only one that cemetery is allowed in, and there isn't a single cemetery in Aspen zone to it.
That's correct.
So figure that one out.
Well, you also said that, that an allowed use is detached, single-family dwelling, et cetera. So, I mean, you're currently zoned, you know, in a zone district that doesn't technically allow usage. So I was thinking conservation zone allows not only a cemetery, but also residential usage. It's not a detached unit, that's a smaller detail. Anyway, and then the last one I have was about route access. I did not really see an opportunity for coming in through another entry, but I was wondering if there would be the possibility of using the easternmost access or limiting that vehicular access to that easternmost route instead of the westernmost route, which runs against the backs of those houses. So I would think that if this were to be allowed, that there would be a way to mitigate for some of that. I would assume that some of the neighbors' concerns are headlights, traffic, and the like. So,
Stoney's saying that generally, people who use the maintenance facility today, Stoney or the employee, use the middle as opposed to the very western side or eastern side. I don't think there would be any objection to having the eastern side be the direction.
Okay, if there's no other questions, and we're gonna take public comment here in a moment, I wanna put something out there before public comment for consideration. You know, in 2014, the city council was willing to give this the approval for that certain time, or what was it, time-to-time usage, as it were. It doesn't sound like it was really utilized that much. It also doesn't sound like the current condition of it is that we would be looking to move somebody into this unit immediately. So I would love if all parties were considerate of going back to something similar to the 2014 approval for a year or two, probably 2 is what I would suggest, to give it another try. I know that there's a lot of, you know, we're gonna hear some comments that have to do with how this is going to impact neighbors, and with adequate screening around this building, and the current condition of the fact that I don't believe it's slated to be lived in by a full-time on-site caretaker immediately. This gives us the opportunity to look at some of those impacts in real time, in real life. So I would love parties to consider the opportunity to go back to a similar approval to the 2014. And then, you know, this council could put in stipulation, if there's no issues, that it could become permanent, this, that, and the other. So there's just other ways to skin the cat, as we say. And one of those ways is to put this on trial basis so that everybody has living experience with it, and not something of a 10-year-old approval that we're just recounting on. With that, this is a public hearing, so thank you, gentlemen. I'm gonna make some space at this front desk so that we can get some public comment. And I will open the public comment portion for ordinance number 7. This is 808 Cemetery Lane, the Red Butte Cemetery, Plan Development, Use Variation, GMQS Review. Are there members of the public that wish to speak on ordinance number 7 this evening?
I'm John Kelleher, and that I've got 2 relatives currently permanent as residents of that cemetery, and I've got 5 more plots that I'm looking forward to occupying, so that I'm 100% in favor of having a permanent caretaker there. I think that Stoney's done a great job through the years maintaining that, and I think that we need to have somebody there on a full-time basis. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
John, we don't want you to rush into that.
Yeah, right. I'm here for another 20 years.
Okay.
Minimum.
On this side? Comments?
All right, so good afternoon, or I guess evening now. I'm Jonathan Nickel. I live at 1270 Snow Bunny. Could you speak a little? Sure. Is that better?
That is good. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm speaking here on behalf of the property owners that are kind of on the end that's going to be most affected. Almost all of them oppose this action, as I'm sure you can understand. And also, just as kind of a side note, a lot of the feedback that has come from people that actually don't live next to the cemetery or even don't even live in Aspen, so we would ask you to take that into consideration. Basically, we need your help here. The decision before you, in my opinion, is not so much about employee housing, it's about keeping commitments and having trust in our government and the functioning of when promises are met, that they will be kept based on the things that were given in terms of concessions. 2009, we were promised that it was clearly needed to make a concession of no employee housing in the cemetery to make this work. The facility would not be used for housing. Then in 2014, as soon as it was built, they were right back asking for permission again. And they said they would no intent to make this a permanent dwelling unit. There are other commitments that were failed to be complied with. I think, from my personal opinion, the most important is they have accumulated a large amount of funds. They've had accumulated over $900,000 in the last 10 years. That could have been used for housing, to get off-site housing. There are lots of other alternatives out there with that amount of money, but they have chosen not to do that. And now they're asking, come back to us, and they say, trust us again. We're back at the till the third time, and we promise there won't be any other housing units or any other long-term stuff. So we just would like you to support that. Now, if you feel that you cannot support this and reject it outright, we do have specific asks. I think there was some good discussion about what are enforceable restrictions that can guarantee we don't come back here. We've thought about things like what's a deed restriction in favor of the neighbors, so that the neighbors would have to, they could come back, but then the neighbors would have to be in an agreement that that's okay. I think that's an interesting thing to explore, as opposed to it just being, okay, go back and go through this same process again. That has not worked for the neighbors. It's just been coming back and coming back. So anything that can make it so this doesn't happen again. The landscaping proposal that staff has proposed and was the original one back in 2014, that was designed for not a full-time occupied building. We would respectfully request that if you do go forward with this, that we get landscaping in that really shields the facility. Like some nice, dwarf pine trees or something can really block out, us having to view cars, people working in the yard, things along those lines. And then, just the restrictions about, making sure the serenity of the cemetery is maintained, and that, whatever restriction that could be that the neighbors could have input into, and that the right to use the unit as housing would be lost if those compliance are not met. So if, somebody ends up having a lot of parties, that actually that the cemetery puts some skin in the game to make sure that if we aren't complying with the rules, that we could lose our privilege. And then finally, I think it would be beneficial if the things that, like requiring the, what is it called here? The restriction only, this be the only property of the employee, like other ABSHA housing. I don't think that's to the benefit of anybody. It will just have the facility used more, which from our perspective is bad, as around the neighbors. We would like less traffic, less car lights, all these things. And it would be much easier for them to maintain a long-term employee. As the applicant stated, 325 square feet is not really a lot of space. I would much rather work there, sleep there when I had to, be able to go home to my house anywhere in the valley at that period of time. So thank you for your time. Those would be our requests.
Thanks. Got a couple questions for you, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
How long have you lived in your residence?
Say 10 years now. We moved there in 2013.
So you were there in 2014 when they had the conditional usage. Do you remember any issues with that conditional usage at the time?
Did
they even do it?
What was the last part?
Did they even utilize it?
Yeah, they did. I think there was about 35 to 40 nights that were used over the year. if I remember the reports correctly. The main issues were, you know, what you would expect. The cars were parked there and, you know, we could directly see them from our housing, you know, lights at different times of the night. You know, it's just additional use that you would see from that, and just, you know, kind of disturbance to what today is only used kind of from like 9 to 5 kind of thing, and the guys are there and you barely notice them, and then, you know, you have somebody living there full time. I mean, as you would expect, there was additional, you know, disturbance to what is normally something that's, you know, super quiet and tranquil and full of wildlife, so.
So your house is 300 and something feet away from this structure?
Yeah, I mean, I wake up in the morning and look right at it,
So
and then go to bed looking at it.
So the vegetation shielding would go a long way for you regardless of what happened.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's something I've been in constant contact with both Jeffrey and the RBCA around, and, you know, just hats off to Jeffrey and putting up with all of us in this process. He did a great job. But, yeah, I mean, you know, we've all seen great shielding
Sure.
in Aspen with like dense pine trees where you don't see the light.
Yeah, we understand. I get that. So your main objection, this kind of goes back to what Sam was asking about, your main objection is light pollution primarily?
Yeah, just, I mean, my main objection is, you know, I bought the house, at least at that time, is, you know, promised that there wasn't gonna be, housing in there. As soon as I bought it, then the next day, you know, there's this motion in front of city council. And so, yeah, that's my main objection. I think they should be held to that promise. Now, given that, if that can't happen, then, you know, I understand that the situation we're in, you know, my objections then move to, okay, well, let's make this work as well as possible for everybody. In the last, you know, time this went around, the neighbors actually kind of come forward and said, okay, now we're in support of this based on the changes that have been made. But that was, you know, the meetings were postponed several times, and there was some good discussion, so that the neighbors could get, you know, quality input into this plan.
Thank you so much.
Yep, thank you.
Appreciate it. Yes, sir.
My name is Doug McPherson. My wife and I live on Cemetery Lane, directly adjacent to the road that is generally used, 1222 Cemetery Lane. We lived there before this was built, and after it's been built, and I haven't seen really any difficulty with either the shed, which I think is quite attractive. I urge you to pass this as is. I think an on-site maintenance manager and an affordable unit that you get for free is a great thing for the cemetery, which I think is a real benefit to Aspen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Other
He meant
come on up.
Snow Bunny Lane, not Cemetery Lane.
First. Yeah. I'm sorry. My name's Susan McPherson, and my husband was misspeaking. We live on Snow Bunny, and our bedroom is about 20 to 30 feet from the road accessing the cemetery inside. My feeling about it is that we need someone in there full-time. I see every night, not every night, but quite a few nights of the week, cars coming into the cemetery. As you said, they might be teenagers, but over the years, we've had people camping in there. We've had 2 fires in there that I've had to call the fire department about because there's nobody there to watch the place at night. If you all like the cemetery and you have people that you love in there, you don't want people camping in there and using the gravestones as bathrooms, which is what they do when they camp in there. And there's nobody there to watch it all the time. Also, the person that was using that place, I knew him quite well, and he was staying there a few nights, but he did not have a car. So there were no cars coming in at night to shine into the housing behind the cemetery. He rode a bicycle or took the bus and lived in Basalt. So, that was, I think, another misstatement. But I would very much like to have somebody in there so that I didn't have to worry at night about people coming in, tearing up the cemetery, doing drugs, camping, et cetera, et cetera. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Other members of the public for public comment this evening?
Thank you very much. My name is Ned Walker. I do not live adjacent to the cemetery, but I still consider myself a neighbor. I live on Silver King, which takes me about 5 minutes to walk over there. I buried my 26-year-old daughter there a few years ago. And so, as you might imagine, I visited the cemetery quite a bit. And I've come across people trying to camp there at the cemetery, especially on the eastern side. I've had strangers come up, when I go in the evening, and it would give me some ease to know that somebody's there full time. And I think what the council needs to do, you guys have a beautiful backyard, and, I understand your concerns through that, but I think the cemetery belongs to the community, and the council needs to look at the cemetery for the future. What's going to preserve it? It is historical. It started 125 years ago, and as we all know, it started before any of us were here, and, I own 7 plots like somebody else here too, and I'll be there one day, and hopefully, 30, 40 years from now. But I'd just like you to consider going ahead and approving it. And I haven't talked to Stoney, but Mayor, your ideas, should we do it for, 2-3 years and give it a shot? I don't think that would hurt. But I do think we need somebody there. And at the same time, I appreciate everything you all have to say living there. And I think Stoney seems committed to putting up a barrier so that there's no light pollution, because I think we all understand what that's about. But I think there's a real willingness on part of the cemetery to ease some of those concerns. So I appreciate your thoughts on not your thoughts, but your action on that.
Thank you for coming tonight.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you, Ned.
Sorry for your loss.
Yes, sir.
I am Joshua Saslov, and I am here as president of the Aspen Jewish Cemetery. The Aspen Jewish Cemetery has had a relationship as part of the Red Butte Cemetery for, I believe, over 30 years, 35 years, of which I have been the president. I think it goes without saying that that we, speaking of the entire group that control the cemetery, have taken great care of it. And I think we owe the respect to everybody who has been buried there and to those who will be buried there in the future. We give the cemetery with perpetual care, and needless to say, it's been more and more expensive to take care of the cemetery the way we have. And I think we should give this approval so that we can continue the care and the respect to those who are there and those who will be there. Thank you.
Thanks for coming. Other public comment this evening? This is ordinance number 7, Cemetery Lane. Yes, ma'am? Yes, come on up.
My name is Lynn Russell, and in the interest of full disclosure, I am married to Stoney Davis. So I've also been involved with cemetery for 35 years. I just wanted to make a couple of points. The point was raised about the money the cemetery has. It's true that we have a $900,000 fund that is earmarked. It's a dedicated fund for perpetual care. The plots at this time are sold for $2,000 apiece. 500 of every plot goes into the perpetual care fund. That's so that when we have no more plots to sell, the cemetery doesn't become the Ute Cemetery. It needs to have, is an endowment to continue to fund the care. So I want to make that clear. I think they have another $400,000 in operating funds. These funds, the perpetual care fund cannot be used to purchase housing, but also the cemetery wants to house someone on site. We're not trying to get somebody to live in Basalt or in Snowmass Village or whatever. We want somebody to live on site. My husband is the person that lives in Aspen. So he's over there all the time, night or day. When Susan McPherson calls us and tells us there's a fire, Stoney's over there. He's going to be 82 in August. This has become more than he can be responsible for the indefinite future. So he's trying to, this is also a perpetual care issue. He's trying to arrange appropriate on-site help because the other board members live down valley as far as Glenwood Springs. So I just wanted to clear up those couple of points.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Lynn.
Other members of the public to comment on ordinance number 7 this evening?
The cemetery, what's the cemetery? Well, the Greeks and the Romans said it was a sleeping place and
Could you introduce yourself? Could you introduce yourself for the record, please?
Do I have to throw a switch?
No, just tell us your name, please.
Oh, Bob Beals.
Thank you.
So anyway, the cemetery is supposed to be a sacred place, a place to be buried and so forth and so on. And the definition of a barn is where you keep equipment and work on the equipment, and that's the end of the deal. Back in 2012 and 14, John Thorpe and Joe Porter and all of them had 2 years worth of discussion for the building of the barn. And they finally said, we'll build the barn and we'll never let anybody live in it forever. That's the agreement, it's in writing. Jay Baxter lived next door to me. He was the first MD in Aspen. I used to go over and talk to him all the time. He had the same view of the cemetery almost as I do. I look over the whole back end just like John Nichols does. If you come in the cemetery at night, you come to the back end of it, I see you. Laying in my bed, I can see you. And it's not fun to see lights running around in there at night. So the city council was very good, but John Thorpe and Joe Porter worked that thing out, and they built the barn. Jay Baxter next door, that was the MD, didn't like the idea of having anybody live in it, and he was on I think he was on the cemetery board at that time. I'm quite positive. He told me he was. Funniest, nicest guy you ever met. So the construction of the barn went on, and he sort of got done. There was articles in, if you look under Safari, there's articles in the Aspen Times about what I just talked about. And then they started the construction of the barn, and Mr. Thorpe moved down to Carbondale. He had breathing illnesses and so forth and so on. So during all this time, somebody that I knew, he worked at the ski corps all winter, Dennis Davey. He worked for 20 years maintaining the cemetery. He must have did a pretty good job because the person that puts the most headstones in there is Carlson Memorial down in Grand Junction. They even built one for me. I put one in there a couple of years ago. I had 2 plots. Right next to it is a friend of mine, Sonny Bippus, has 8 plots. Estonia doesn't like the idea because hers is so tall, but it was a slice of white marble that was used for the Tomb of the Unknown Soldiers in Arlington, Virginia. And she put it up there and spent a great deal of money having it engraved down there at Carlson's or whatever happened. So Dennis Davey worked over there, and I got to where I knew him, and he'd walk over to the fence because I'm sitting right there looking at it. And later on, he got sick. He came over to me and he said, I'm not working here anymore. He said, I got Rocky Mountain spotted fever. Being a doctor, I've had one patient, I'm not an MD doctor, I'm a dentist. He was a patient of mine. He committed suicide. That's how bad it was. It's hard to treat. You have to get first-class treatment. And I was talking to Dennis Davey, and he says, my insurance don't cover it. It's not working, and I'm quitting. So it's a 20-year person maintaining the cemetery, and then you got Kay Carlson down there telling me that only one cemetery that she does business with is as nice as the Red Butte Cemetery. So all this time and all this trouble that we've been listening about having somebody in the barn, the way it's been run, it's been awful nice for somebody to give it that great of a compliment.
I could listen to you forever, but in this setting, I need to limit you to a few minutes.
I'm going to be done in just a minute.
You've had 3, and
Not
if you
problem.
could, thank you.
I've been listening to the other ones. So upon finishing the barn, it was supposed to be landscaped by the cemetery committee. There's not one piece of landscaping out there, okay? And about 6 years ago, whatever it was, you granted the cemetery to put someone in there to stay at night. That was Dennis Davey. And he, in the summertime, he only worked there in the summer. He stayed there 12 nights in a row. He used to stay up there in that little Victorian place a little bit, or stay down at his place. There's not 12 days in a row that's got inclement weather, because in the thing, it says you can stay there during inclement weather. There's not 12 days in a row that have inclement weather. Okay, so the landscaping wasn't done.
I need to ask you to wrap up your comments.
Okay. So there was no landscaping done. And there was all the gas and diesel fuel that was in there. And the fire department came over and checked it, and it had to be all changed and done. And that's been over there as a big junk pile for 10 years. Oh, so Aspen Tree, I had to do some work. This is the last one. Aspen Tree Service came over there to do some work for me, and they said, what's with all those trees out there? I said, I don't know. I don't own the cemetery. He said, those are cottonwood trees, and they have enough problems with cottonwood trees in the old part of the cemetery because they overlap and you can't cut the tree down. You pull down 2 of them. And he said, they're all planted too close. So that's from Aspen Tree, and that's the biggest reliable tree service in the valley.
Thank you.
So I'll leave, and that's my 3 minutes.
Thank you. If you'd like, you can leave those papers with the city clerk, and
What?
if you'd like to leave your notes with the city clerk, you can.
I can't hear.
Thank you very much. Other members of the public to comment this evening on ordinance number 7? You can just leave that on the table.
Oh.
You guys can have it if you want.
Thank you.
My name is Steve Spiritus, and I'm speaking on behalf of myself and my wife. We have resided on Overlook Drive and are adjacent to the cemetery for over 33 years. We've had our home. Hopefully you all have read the letter that was part of our package to council from Bill Kane when he was the Director of Planning for the City of Aspen and for Pitkin County. And he covers how the city worked with the Red Butte Cemetery to end up with the park zoning. His letter goes into the details as to how that occurred, and when he heard that there was going to be housing back in 2008, he wrote a letter to HPC voicing his strong opinion against it and explained why he felt it was a unnecessary, unfair procedure that should be followed for the cemetery property. I'll just highlight a few points. He says it's a rare sanctuary of peace in which it's become in a highly developed community. I urge you to vote against this plan. It's just intuitively not right to build on parklands. I respect for the integrity of the community and the Aspenites that request that you recommend against this proposal. In 2008, after we owned our home for 17 years at the time, we learned that RBC was seeking a single-family residence within the consecrated ground of the cemetery. Since HPC did not support a residence, RBC settled for a maintenance building. At that time, John Thorpe, president of RBC, and Alan Richmond, representing RBC, assured the council and neighbors that RBC would never seek to create a dwelling within the maintenance building. And I'm quoting from the minutes of HPC back then. Council granted RBC a one-year trial. During that trial, the employee only slept 42 nights for the whole year. They had a one-year trial for him to sleep there. RBC let the trial expire. Now, 10 years later, they're back again, seeking a variance to the original 2009 ordinance, which prohibited it. The current staff recommendation to HPC was reached through a flawed and unfair process. Despite documented objections from residents, staff never reached out to the neighbors. There was no outreach or dialogue with the community, with a long history dating back to 2008 of how the residents felt about this proposal for a single-family home. RBC takes the misguided position that converting the maintenance building into a single-family home is the only solution to providing a home for an employee. Although an employee dwelling is unnecessary, RBC has the economic means to pursue other alternatives, such as countless ADUs are sitting vacant in the neighborhood, purchase or rent something somewhere, APSHA, and so forth. RBC also argues that the cemetery cannot be maintained without having someone live on the property. However, it's indisputable that the cemetery has functioned and has been properly and safely maintained for over 100 years with no one living on site. Every square inch of the cemetery is consecrated ground. Access to the single-family dwelling location is a big concern. Family living there means garbage pickup, package and mail delivery, normal day-to-day coming and going, parties, celebrations, indoor and outdoor entertaining, children's play equipment, all of which involves cars and trucks passing through the active burial section of the cemetery. In our opinion, it's disrespectful and unseemly. I would like to read to you from the Articles of Incorporation dated 1899 when the Cemetery Association was formed. The object of its formation and existence should be the acquisition, beautifying, and using of a tract of land for burial purposes, and all things incidental to the carrying on of places of the burial of the dead. And this was in the recorded documents back in 1899. The document evidences that the founders of the cemetery did not intend to have a single-family residence. For informational purposes, there are 14 cemeteries in Pitkin County, none of which have a person residing within any of them. In closing, it should be apparent that a single-family residence on otherwise vacant land reserved for the dead vastly changes the character of the property. Quoting from the authentic Aspen Pledge, "I will honor the history and heritage of those who were here before me and preserve the land for those who come after me. We urge the council to preserve the history and serenity of this community asset by rejecting the application. And I might just add, I'd like to review a few quotes from.
Please quickly, that's 5 minutes for you.
Okay, then I will just say, I'd like to address a few comments that Mr. Richmond made, if I could have just a few.
I'm sorry,
Okay.
that's 5 minutes for you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Yes, sir. If you can, please limit your comments to 3 minutes.
I will do so.
Thank you.
Thank you for those 3 minutes. My name is Arnie Elisha, and I have a number of family members here, but more importantly, I have many family members who are buried in the cemetery. We've heard much about the dates of 2008 and 2014. I would look back, and I don't believe I heard in the discussion, though I was out of the room for a moment, the fact that in census records, it shows that a person actually lived on the cemetery in 1920, 1930, and 1940. So this discussion of no precedence has been made is completely moot, given that fact, and easily confirmed with census data. I do not currently live in Aspen. I was born here in 1959. My father was born here in 1925. My grandfather was born here, and my great-grandfather was in the valley in the 1890s, before the cemetery was even done. My grandfather and my great-grandfather are both buried out there, along with their wives and many other members who were pillars of this community for many, many years. I believe that the protection of the cemetery through an on-site caretaker with the precedent that exists for it is warranted, and that simple mitigations can be done to satisfy the concerns of the local residents. I think we owe this respect to our ancestors and those who built this city, and more importantly, kept it alive between mining and skiing. Those people are there, and we visit every chance that we can get, and I myself will be visiting with Stoney tomorrow to buy a plot together with my sister so that we can be buried here as well. So we will be perpetually here ourselves. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Yes. One question for you, Arnie?
Of course, I'm sorry. I'm guessing you're related to the family that
very much so.
the Elisha Manor.
Manzer and Lawrence Elisha, who owned and ran the Jerome Hotel from 1911 to 1968. That is my lineage. My father was second in the Roach Cup ski race 2 years in a row in the 40s, and he is currently buried in Walsenburg, where he passed away when he was superintendent of schools down there. And we are working to exhume him, have him cremated, and have his remains placed in the Red Butte Cemetery. So this is very personal to us.
It's moving, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you. Thank you.
Other members of the public for comment this evening on ordinance number 7?
Hello, my name is Chris Bryan. I'm a local attorney. Just been listening tonight, and there are a couple of things I wanted to point out. I think the last speaker might have misheard Mr. Richmond. Based on the staff memo that you have at page 64 of your packet, there was George Jenkinson as a caretaker who was listed in the census records as being the caretaker, but there's no evidence that he lived on site in that 1920, 1930, or 1940 census. I think the only evidence we saw of that was a brief mention in a 1901 newspaper article about a sexton who lived there briefly. It does occur to me that this does create some precedential issues for you. And I know that a lot of the speakers tonight have spoken primarily about their affection for the cemetery and the importance of it to them and their families, and that's not to be undermined or discounted. But you also have to look at the bigger picture of what you're here for. And allowing this type of amendment after previous councils decided not to allow on-site housing at this one cemetery where there are no other on-site housing. I think, as one of the speakers said, there's 14 cemeteries in the county and none of them have on-site. The fact that this cemetery has been maintained for 125 years without on-site employee housing, I think speaks to the value that they can actually take care of it without having an on-site employee. And then there also seems to be a bigger concern that I come at from as a land use attorney, that if you open the door to this, it's a little bit like a Trojan horse, where right now they come in and say, well, we just want 352 square feet for one employee. And this is 10 years after they said, well, we just want to do it for a trial period. That trial period ended up having, 42 nights, I heard. And then they didn't find the needs compelling enough to come back and ask for renewal. And then that came after the 2009, where there were representations that they would never use the maintenance facility for on-site housing. And so you see this slow-paced rescinding of what has been represented to neighbors in the community before, and to members of this council, or not this council, but prior iterations of this council. And I'm also concerned about what this means for other properties that might be zoned park or have PD overlays with respect to that. There is a concern to me that while there are some examples that Mr. Richmond cited, including at the golf course, which is not a cemetery, at the Ark, which is a recreation center, which does not have the same importance or sacrosanct nature as a cemetery, or at the Anderson Park place, those are all fundamentally different places. But it's what you could be creating a blueprint for here, is for seeing developers come in and say, well, that park looks like a great place to put employee housing. And you have this trickle, and previous councils have held the line, and it would occur to me that you should as well. And I'll leave you with this. It is concerning, I think, to some members of the public that despite the promises that were made in 2014 when they were in front of council and in 2009, that screening has not occurred, the vegetation has not occurred. I think the applicant would have been much stronger coming to you now if they had done those things instead of continue to promise them. There was an interesting mention by, I think it was Mr. Nickel, where he said, why not offer a deed restriction to the neighbors that says you will not expand this in the future into multifamily or larger spaces. That would seem to be an interesting way to approach this issue. And then there's also the concern that I think I saw in the presentation, I forget if it was staff or Mr. Richmond's, but he said, well, we'll have a lease that says that there can't be a nuisance or anything like that, but the lease is unenforceable by you. The lease would only be enforceable by the employer against the employee living there, and we all know that leases can be under-enforced, so that's something that you would probably want to make stronger. There are a lot of other points, and I would not be surprised if this council wanted to table this and take this under further consideration, but I am probably at the end of my 3 minutes, so I'll end there.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Oh, we have someone online. Tara has a hand up. Tara, can you hear us? Can you unmute?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yep, go right ahead.
Good afternoon, council member and mayor. Tara Nelson. Full disclosure, I am a City of Aspen employee, but I'm speaking to you today on behalf as a City of Aspen resident. I reside at 707 Cemetery Lane, and I've been in my employee housing unit here on Cemetery Lane for over 12 years. This property is one of the few and far between employee housing units that are directly on Cemetery Lane. I've been able to grow my family here, and I ride the bus frequently to work. I enjoy living in my employee housing unit, as I've also been a 21-year City of Aspen employee. I just wanted to publicly comment and say that concessions are key parts of negotiations, and they take many forms. And as we've seen in the last 5 years, let alone since 2014, things do change. I 100% support RBC and the vision of Stoney Davis and his foresight. I do believe this is about affordable housing and preserving a historic property. So I just wanted to give my full support for the caretaker unit going in today before you. I've been to this cemetery numerous times with my father when he was alive, with Stony, when my father passed, to look for a grave marker for my father. I think it's a great amenity, and I fully support what you have before you and concessions that you may or may not be making relative to approvals. Thanks.
Thank you, Tara.
Thank you. Other members of the public here to comment on ordinance number 7 this evening? Yes, sir.
Can I say something?
You can.
Absolutely. Is this on?
Yes.
My name's Stoney Davis. I'm volunteer manager of the current cemetery. I've been doing it for something like 30 years. And I live in town. I can get to the cemetery in 5 or 10 minutes. And so that's why we haven't needed an on-site manager. And Dennis Debbie, as somebody mentioned, he lived there in the little white house without water or sewer for like 25 years that he was an employee there. He was a ski patroller at Buttermilk, and he would come over and work 3 days at Buttermilk or 4 days, spend that time, the nights at the cemetery. In the summer, he'd come from Meeker and stay 3 or 4 days, and then go back to Meeker. But I've heard a lot of stuff about what was promised and what was going on in 14 and whatever, but we're not talking about something that's, we're talking about something that's, 100 and some years old that needs to be maintained. And we're not talking about the past, but we'd like to talk about the future and who's going to maintain the cemetery. It's not a city parks department cemetery. It takes volunteers and employees to do it. And that's why we're looking for a place for somebody to live. I'm not going to be here for the next 10 or 15 years. So, and what our proposal is that what we want to do is rent that place rent-free to somebody to help motivate, to try to find somebody to live. Yes, in that 350 feet or something. That's going to be a job. And so about your 2-year trial or something, it's going to be hard to try to hire somebody and say, well, you can live here for 2 years, and then maybe you can't, maybe you can't. So that's what we're trying to do. We're not talking about the past. And whether somebody will sit here in 2042, another 20 years from now, and ask for, another an expansion of the place, I can't say. But as needs change, the cemetery's needs change, we try to take care of them. So I appreciate a vote for getting this thing passed. Thank you.
Hey, so a question for you, because my suggestion about 2 years to get the screening put in place to see how it operates wasn't an attempt to say, hey, you need to put somebody in there immediately. It was really saying that at this time you have the opportunity to let somebody use it who's working there to demonstrate how this is benign or not.
Yeah.
So I wasn't trying to put something on you as a difficulty for hiring somebody who wants to live in 350 square feet, because that's going to be a challenge you're going to have to take on. But I was saying that a 2-year chance to see how this works. My point being there, it was tried in 2014. To me, it sounds like it was a non-event. So I'm just saying.
I agree.
How do we get there?
Dennis is the guy. Dennis Debbie is the guy that came over from Meeker, and instead of living without water and sewer, he moved into the barn and stayed there for the time, for the summer. But he was only over here 3 or 4 days a week.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tony.
All right, any other members of the public that wish to comment this evening on ordinance number 7? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to council table. Can we get Alan back up at the table, please? Yeah, Alan Richmond. We're gonna need you. I have a feeling. We're definitely gonna need you at some point.
Come on, Jeffrey, come on, Ben.
Okay, it's back at council table. Council discussion. Care to share any thoughts before we call a vote? Sam, want to share any input?
Well, I'd ask you, Tori, do you want to put a I guess the question in front of me, otherwise I feel set on this, is do you want to put a number of years on this? I do feel like codifying that it can't go any further than this as best one can. I do agree with you, and I think the biggest deal of compromise I've heard is the level of landscaping that really needs to go in. I mean, the moral of the story is this. People feel, I'm not sure if betrayed's the right word, I'll use it, that things have spiraled to a point where they were never expecting it to get, potentially. But beyond that, they really want to live their lives and not notice the person that's living there, which, you know, I respect. I think we can get to a point where hopefully they can not notice the person that's living there, and that ultimately both sides feel like they've won. Even though, obviously, I can't stress enough the discomfort with the fact that it has gotten to this point, even though it felt like pseudo-promises were made, if not actual promises, because like you said, you're doing everything within the letter of the law. So those are my thoughts, and then listening to the rest of council talk about it, I'd like to hear what levels of compromise everyone else is at.
Thank you. John, any thoughts, input, questions?
No questions. I have some comments. Should I share them now or before the vote? Now. For me, I think having one person present at the cemetery watching over things is much better than having the possibility of camping, fires, vandalism, errant sprinklers, things of that nature. I think with the proper screening, most of the neighbors' concerns can be addressed. I understand their chagrin at the changing dynamic of what's going on at the cemetery, but we live in a changing world, and we're not here to think short-term, we're here to think long-term. So I will be supporting what HPC unanimously supported, as well as staff.
Thanks, Sean.
This is really difficult for me. The employee housing unit proposed checks all the boxes as far as what Aspen Area Community Plan wants. It would free up, potentially free up units somewhere else in the valley for someone to live in this unit. Yet, and it's unusual, we have a group of people that are old, a lot of old timers up here with a split decision. I'm fully understand and take into consideration the concerns of the neighbors. And I understand that things change and that PDs are not cast in stone, and has been reminded to me many times by our city attorney, there's nothing we can do that a future council can't undo. I think we've seen that in 2009, 2014 on this, and that there's ample evidence of PD amendments, both minor and major PD amendments, that it's something that's part of the process, and that we live in a dynamic world where things change. I understand the concerns of the neighbors on Snow Bunny, and I asked particularly about the access on Overlook and Black Birch, because I felt that that was the biggest complaint from the neighbors on Snow Bunny, whose cemetery is the backyard. I felt, and it was reassured by the city, that that wasn't an option, but I wanted to get it out in front as something to mitigate the traffic that may go along that area to, or that drive to get back to the maintenance facility. As far as a 2-year trial period, I don't think the cemetery would want to put the capital improvements into. I'm projecting in my mind that cemetery would not want to put the capital improvements into that, that unit if they thought it was only for 2 years. So I fully understand and empathetic with the neighbors, but I feel that I will be supporting this.
Thanks, Ward. You know, once again, I would be supportive of that 2-year. I think the improvements, the screening, they should be doing anyway. And the interior of it, I believe, is plumbed. I don't think there's a whole bunch that's going to take to really get that unit to be usable.
That's right.
So I don't think the capital improvements are that expensive. Again, I just think that a 2-year ability to try this out, to get the screening in place, to prove to the neighbors that this is unobtrusive, I think is a real opportunity here. So,
What happens after 2 years?
Good whispering.
thank you. Well, he's only got one ear, so. Yeah, you know, and I don't know. That's why I wanted you back at the table, because I don't know. My anticipation here is, well, here's a couple things. One, it's not an immediate need right now. You guys are not looking at hiring somebody to move them in there this month. That's not what's happening. So I already see a runway here. As far as 2 years go, the reason I didn't say 1 year, because I don't think that's long enough for you to see anything. But I think in 2 years, your current maintenance plan and caretaker would utilize it somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 75 days a year. That seems to be the pattern when it was utilized as part-time housing. And that's what it would be under the current conditions. That would give the opportunity to see the screening for neighbors to have a level of comfort with this that I think that they could get from it, from that usage. If that's not something that we can get done and that we see a path for, then I'm willing to take a vote on this evening, one way or the other. So that's where I'm at.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So in 2 years, are you thinking the burden is on the applicant to come back in and request continuous? Or is the burden on the city to say this was unacceptable and the use terminate? I mean, there has to be some mechanical.
I completely understand.
Yeah.
I don't know. I would look at legal. I would look at ComDev for like, how do you do this kind of thing? I mean, obviously, my anticipation would be, or my expectation, I should say, would be that it's going to be non-obtrusive and that the light pollution, which seems to be the main source of aggravation for the neighbors, is something that could be mitigated, and I don't think that there'd be a problem. I think after 2 years, it would be something that would say, yes, if it turns into more full-time usage, it would be okay. I also have to say, 350 square feet in that location for a job attached, I think you're gonna have your issues anyway with that.
We
So I
understand.
don't think this is a cakewalk for you to say, hey, somebody's gonna move in there and be living there for years and years, because I just don't see it conducive to that relationship. So it's partial time usage might actually end up being what you end up with anyway. That's why I was suggesting the 2-year time frame for both you and the neighborhood to kind of feel this out and see what's up. What I would want is, at the end, I would want a simple process. So if there were no grievances, if there were no violations of any stipulations that we put into an ordinance, that in 2 years, that could have an automatic transfer. If not, then I would expect a very simple hearing format. I would not want a reapplication process. So I don't know how we get there, but this is just a way of kind of getting our community together on a decision. You know, I would also expect that the neighbors would say, yeah, we appreciate that. We appreciate at least, you know, having some time for this. So it's all good. We don't have to go there. I'm really looking at these three more than I'm looking at you right now. If that's something that these three wanted to pursue, then we would have more discussion. And even if that's send it away so that we could get language drafted on this and approve it at our next meeting, that's fine. But if the other members of this board are more inclined to do something that is permanent in this ordinance, I understand that. So really, the question is for you guys, not them. Yeah, Sam.
No, I absolutely agree. So, yeah, I think there, I don't know the mechanism like you mentioned, but I do think there should be some form of trial period. Especially because the landscaping was promised in 2014, it hasn't been implemented. We don't know what that's like. And since you've come back a couple times to ask for this, I think you should at least come back at least one more time to make it in perpetuity. So I definitely believe in the trial period.
I appreciate that. John, your feelings on it?
Well, it seems like if you and Sam are both for it, we've got a 4-person council right now. I would like this to go forward tonight in some shape or form.
Thank you.
So I guess I will go along with the 2-year trial period.
Ward, what are your thoughts on this?
Choice, but-
Just your input about getting to where we're trying to go.
Well, I think a 2-year trial period is kind of kicking it down the road and letting somebody else deal with it 2 years from now. You know, I can understand the concerns. But I think I would not be in support of 2-year. I'd like to just get it done here tonight.
Okay. With that being said then, if we want to structure a motion for this evening then, we can try to do that.
Mr. Mayor, if that's the case, you know, I think that we would request a continuation. The mechanism for doing what is being suggested is mostly unclear to me. I think there's, you know, I think in doing a temporary period or a temporary test, there's relationship to deed restrictions, there's relationship to the outcomes of this ordinances being binding. I would say that I would find it difficult to come back 2 years from now without going through another public hearing process, another ordinance process, simplifying that. The language to do so, I think, would be difficult to arrive at this evening, if that's council's intention. So if that is council's intention to pursue a temporary time period as again, a trial period, we would ask for a continuation because that language is not something that we can arrive at this evening, I don't believe.
John?
Yeah, just to be clear, I would prefer to not have a trial period, to just follow staff's recommendation. But that said, I would like to see something go forward tonight.
Okay.
If I may chime in, I
Yeah,
agree.
please.
I agree with Ben with regard to your suggestion that there be some simple process, and I certainly wouldn't recommend that it be on council to revoke a license, so to speak. I do not recommend that. But if you're going to do something that would allow for the applicant to come back to council at the end of 2 years and apply for either an additional 2 years or even a permanent approval, I think you could come up with language that would satisfy that tonight, because it's simple and I think I've written it. But to have something that shortcuts the ordinance process or the amendment ordinance process, I would have difficulty with, as Ben does.
And I would not be anticipating or wanting another 2 years tacked on. I would not want to keep dragging it. I would just say, you know, I'd want to move it into permanent position at that point if it worked out. You know, there's an issue here because if a neighborhood group opposes this, no matter what happens over the next 2 years, you know, there could be opposition again. But I'm just trying to think of a way to win for everybody, and so that's where I'm at. I'm ready to take a vote on it tonight, though, but if we're gonna do that, we need to put in a couple of requests here. One is that there is an agreement that there would be no more housing other than this unit developed on site.
Yeah, I think
is
that,
something that Sam is asking for. John, is that something that you want?
Little conflicted. I mean, time is always changing. Situation is changing. I can't tell the future.
Ward,
I don't want additional housing on the site.
okay,
And I want to have ComDev have to consider this thoroughly, so we have something that is bomb-proof, so that I guess what I would do is ask for a continuance until the regular meeting on July 9th, with giving time for Ben and Jim to work up, which it seems to be at this table at this time, a 3-to-1 vote for a 2-year trial period.
not necessarily. His preference is to move forward. What I'm asking for now is if we're moving forward tonight, because I'm hearing that a 2-year is something that is troublesome, taking some more time. John.
Just another quick comment, just to be clear. When I say I'm unclear on what the future holds, I want to be clear, I don't support more housing at the cemetery in any shape or form. I do see the possibility of perhaps enhancing the footprint of 300 square feet of living space, though, at some point.
Good point.
I think the sentiments seem to be that no other residential units shall be allowed on the property is the condition that I think you're addressing.
Yes.
Does
Okay.
not prevent expansion of the 350.
Okay.
And
Ben,
we've said we're fine with that.
I'm sorry?
And we've said we're fine with
Yeah.
that as a condition.
Yeah.
So there's no objection.
and so if we're moving forward with an ordinance this evening and not a 2-year period, we're talking about no more housing. We're talking about the screening being put in place, and not necessarily the screening that was approved in 2014 that was never accomplished, but an adequate screening for current conditions, et cetera. The other thing that is a concern here, and this is where I don't know what we have control over or not, but what are the parameters that the applicant's willing to put in place around even number of vehicles that can go to visit this residence if it were to be there? What are limitations on social gatherings or parties at this residence? Is that anything that the cemetery can do? I don't really think that that's something that we can do in an ordinance, but that's something, conditions that the cemetery can put on this occupant if they're there.
And in my presentation, we did say that we would be willing to make those kinds of restrictions. I mean, it's more important to this cemetery board than it is to anybody else that the serenity of this cemetery be protected. That's why they're volunteers there.
I know.
So we think we can put that kind of language into the lease and enforce it.
I know.
The idea of parties at a unit like this is absurd to me. It's completely absurd.
Yeah, it's absurd to you, but to the
and-
resident, it might not be.
And so
And let me point out that
needs
there
to be
have been
prohibited
things
in the
that the
lease.
cemetery has agreed to in the past that haven't come to fruition. So these are the concerns, right? These are the concerns.
I get it.
The concern is not about having a caretaker on site. The concerns are the impacts of what that means. Okay? So whatever we can do to limit or minimize those impacts best behooves us for our community.
I understand, and we think it's best to put it into the lease. If we need to pass the lease by the city attorney's office to ensure that the lease is adequately addressing the concerns that we've heard from the council tonight and the neighbors, that's fine. Putting this to a vote of the neighbors, as was suggested, or creating a deed restriction that could be enforced by the I don't know who the neighbors are. The neighbors could be 300
I'm not talking
feet.
about a deed restriction,
So-
I'm talking about just
If it
the
needs-
appropriate usage.
If the lease needs to be passed in front of the city attorney to ensure, and ComDev to ensure consistency with council's concerns, I think that's fine. We think we're the enforcement mechanism on that.
Okay,
You okay with that?
all right.
Yeah.
council members, you have an opportunity to make a motion here for ordinance number 7 with conditions. You have an opportunity to move for continuance so that we can get this language worked out and bring it back in 2 weeks. Or you could move for a 2-year trial period that we'd also need a continuance to work out language. I will leave it at council members' pleasures.
Your Honor, to move things along one way or the other, I'd like to move that we approve ordinance 7 as presented and approved by, that's been presented to us and have been approved by staff, HPC as well.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion. Discussion is, what are the safeguards that are in the ordinance related to what we just talked about? Whether it's screening, no more housing on site. I think there could even be some language about the route that someone takes and not to use the westernmost entrance and exit or pathway.
I definitely think that the city attorney and the applicant can be, at least can be used and agreed upon by the city manager and the city attorney that that hurdle can be made. I fully support the HPC recommendation and the enforcement of landscaping and screening that should have taken place a long time ago. What were some of your other questions, Tori?
Well, it wouldn't live in the ordinance, but there are prohibitions on different activities and the usage, that kind of thing. I mean,
I think perhaps that could be addressed in the lease.
I hope so.
You could put a condition in the approval that any lease shall be provided to the city prior to execution, compliance with representations of applicant.
I would support that.
Thinking of that.
I'd be clear, I'd prefer this be the city attorney's office. This isn't somewhat of an administrative burden to not just write into the ordinance the expectations, from my perspective, that we would be reviewing a lease that could be a 6-month or 12-month process we have to do routinely. It sounds like unnecessary, quite frankly, to me. I would prefer there be a lease approved to the form of the city attorney to address those issues, and that it not need to come back every time it's re-executed. Thank you.
I'm not sure I follow.
What I heard right now requires staff time to review a lease every time it's executed. Leases can be with a deed restriction as short as 6 months. I don't want to spend staff time every 6 months reviewing a lease.
So there's language in the ordinance that can.
I would prefer, if that is council's direction, that is the responsibility of the city attorney's office, because it's a legal instrument, rather than that being in a portion of the administration's duties to review a lease that could be as frequently as 6 months.
Yeah, I can see that a lease that's agreeable to the applicant and to the city attorney that is in perpetuity, that if there were some major change, it would have to be renegotiated, but I don't want it to come through a rewritten lease every 6 months or year.
I mean, we ought to be able to write at one time to say what the nuisances are that we're trying to prohibit. They're fairly obvious. They've been spoken about all night, and we're prepared to restrict those things and not have lights be nuisances, not have parties, not have noise. We can deal with parking. We can deal with every one of these things.
Single occupant.
Yes.
No smoking?
I don't know. No, not necessarily for me. Not necessary for me.
Smell travels, I don't know.
But we're happy to work with the city attorney's office to come to those points and do it once and get it right, not have to do it again. I'm with you.
Okay.
I think that could work.
So do we need an amendment to the
motion and second?
work a lease out between the applicant and the city attorney?
Yes, you made the motion, right?
Yes.
Yeah, you can,
Okay, I amend my motion to include that.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, if I may,
I'll second.
Just a minute, we're in
Yeah.
the middle of a procedure, we need
second.
I'll second.
excuse me.
Yes.
If I may, staff heard three proposals for three conditions that it seemed a majority of council were in support of, and I just wanted to make sure that those were identified. One is additional landscaping to provide buffer from the sort of parking area. I heard a condition precluding further housing on the property, and then we heard a condition about city approval of the form of the lease. Are those three conditions part of this potential amendment, or do those other topics need to be discussed separately?
Those were in the motion.
Those are the three that I understood.
Yes.
There was also a discussion about access. I didn't know if that was a condition.
It wasn't access, it was the internal flow, right? So it's not
I was assuming access to the unit.
to the unit, right?
Using the easternmost road as opposed to the westernmost road.
Or perhaps maybe
Or
the
the
middle's
middle.
fine, I don't know, I'm just saying maybe not the western that's right behind everybody's housing.
Those are fine.
Okay.
Those are fine. I haven't heard a single one of those things that we would object to. All those points are things that we've raised in our presentation and would be comfortable with you imposing.
All right. All right, we have a motion and a second. I think it's clear for everybody what is contained in that ordinance. Any further discussion? Yep.
Yeah, just feel like explaining myself that, to me, the issue is the slippery slope argument that we've gone from 2008 to 2014 to now. And I think we've done a good job with these amendments to prevent further progression of this in the wrong direction, and this does feel like a right step in many ways. It's just the whole idea behind the trial period, which is why I was supportive of that, is because this is not being asked in a vacuum. There's history here, and with that history brings a level of discomfort that makes it not as black and white as I wish it was. Yeah. So with that, I don't know how I'm gonna go yet, so.
Understood, understood. You know, that's why I was suggesting, I mean, look, we've taken an hour
Yeah.
plus on this application this evening alone, not to mention the previous meetings that everybody in this room has had, et cetera, et cetera. That's why I was saying that in order to make sure that this goes well and goes according, that 2-year trial plan where it could, see, once we do this ordinance, it's not non-revocable, right? Once we,
Previous.
The approval would be.
the approval would be
Done and.
non-revocable. You're not gonna get, I mean, everything's a path, but you're not gonna get anybody that says, oh, we gave them approval, but now we're taking this housing away, and that's just not gonna happen.
That would be
So
very-
the way to prevent any of that kind of situation in the future would be to kind of do this 2 years, to make sure that it is in accordance with everything that we're setting out in this ordinance. And if it was in accordance with this, with everything we set out, then it could go on in perpetuity. Perhaps that's the stipulation that we're talking about.
We don't know what a future council might say, though, if, if we keep stretching these timelines, or temporary timelines. What protection would we have from a future council saying, nope, no more 2 years, you're done?
There's a motion.
We understand. I get it. But if you look at the history that goes back quite a ways, that's the same situation that we've all been in for a while. All right, we have a motion. Further discussion is done. We'll take a roll call vote on the motion on the floor, please.
Counselor Doyle,
Yes.
Counselor Howenstein,
Yes.
Counselor Rose,
Yes.
Mayor Tory.
Yes.
Thank you so very much for taking all the time and listening to everyone. Appreciate it.
Please make it work.
Thanks, everybody.
The burden's on us to perform.
Please make it work.
You are right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Financial statement
I wouldn't have bet on that.
for the cemetery.
Oh, okay.
They only have $1.6 million of these cut that damn grass. You can read this stuff.
Thank you all so much. Hey, council members, let's keep going so we can get this last item done and get to our executive session.
Actually, my pen just died.
All right. We're going to move to our next item. Action item. The next item up for discussion is our action item tonight is State of Colorado Sales and Use Tax Collection Services. Thanks, Pete.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, Council. Pete Strecker, Finance Director for the city. Tonight's topic is the result of changing environment and kind of our efforts.
Mr. Beal?
We don't want
Mr. Beal?
Oh, I thought you was through. I'm sorry.
Thank you. All good. Thank you, sir.
It's the result of changing environment and our efforts to kind of evoke some change in our process to capture efficiencies and to better run our operations, hopefully to also implement better return for the community. The recommendation tonight is to move from in-house collection services to an outsourced collection service process. And staff is proposing that we solicit the support of the state of Colorado's Department of Revenue to essentially do our tax collection for our sales and use tax. It will not capture all tax collection services for the city, but it will be able to handle essentially the bulk of the sales tax remitters. The benefit of this is at this time there is no cost to join in the collection process provided by the state. The state is actually a tried and true option. They service all but 2 of the 64 counties and 163 home rule cities at this point. So it's well tested and well run. Moving to the state collection process actually has some benefits. It's actually less burdensome for a lot of taxpayers that don't have to pay the local taxes as well. They already do have to remit at the state level, so this would just streamline their process to also include the city of Aspen sales and use taxes there as kind of one-stop shopping for them. There are instances where we've seen that moving to a state collection process actually results in higher tax collections as a result. We actually have some neighbors down the road that have seen some pretty substantial increases in their actual tax collection as a result of moving. And we actually will eliminate some confusion by having some synergies with moving to a standardized tax code between the state and our local taxation process. Why this is coming up now is essentially that we're having some real challenges with our current software vendor. That contract is about to expire at the end of this year. Best I know, I actually had a conversation with them today and they thought it went longer, but that is not my belief. And currently by having that anticipation, I've been going out and actually pricing some new solutions. Some of those are quite costly, as I put in the packet. I had a second meeting today that substantiated a $400,000 annual cost for some services, which is just astronomical. But there are some solutions that we're finding that are hopefully more suited to our needs, especially if we move to a state collection process for the sales and use tax specifically. That our volume will actually be significantly reduced and we can get a less robust system than what some of these things are being offered at. We also are seeing some staffing challenges, we have had turnover in our tax technician position. Staffing is definitely a concern for our organization. It is a difficult thing to get people to be able to afford to live up here. This is not a high-paying position. But yet we still need a decent set of skills to be able to perform this work. So this is another impetus for why we want to consider this at this time. And then finally, state legislative actions have started to really push more and more into uniformity on the tax collection process. This was the result of the Wayfair case and the aspect that you cannot place an undue burden on tax remitters for collecting sales tax. The state's actions have actually started to creep into kind of the home rule governance space in some of these areas. And so there's a reason why kind of moving this direction actually assists with any issues there. The state does have a mandated timing for this type of migration from a local collection process to a state collection process, which is either on the January 1st or July 1st of any given year. So the timing right now of asking this question of council would set us up, if approved, for a January 1st kind of movement. As I said earlier, this only results in the collection of sales and use tax for the community. It does not collect the other local taxes that we currently impose. So that being the lodging taxes here, the STR tax, and the local tobacco taxes. So we still would have to do that collection in-house. That is a lot less accounts for us. Currently, we have about 4,000 to 5,000 accounts. This would migrate us down to about 1,200, 1,300 accounts to manage. So it does reduce volume. It does create some efficiencies for us internally in terms of how to deal with that. It also does not fully remove the need for a different software solution, or we need to get better performance out of our existing software solution. And we have been working on that for quite some time. We continue to work on that now, but we have yet to see some real dramatic improvement. So it is a big concern for me personally. And what are the benefits of making this type of change? Obviously, we would avoid a large investment in a new software program, as I'm telling you that these software solutions are anywhere from $200,000 to $400,000 annually in some cases. Some have implementation costs as much as $500,000. It's something that I would like to avoid. We would have to implement some tax code changes. Basically, our statute would have to marry that of, our code would have to marry that of the state statutes with some exceptions. And there's roughly about a dozen different items that the state currently exempts that we are able to exempt the exemption. We have done an analysis of that already and found 2 areas where we would probably recommend that take place. One is on food for home consumption, especially if we're going to continue a food tax refund. You would still continue to tax food at the grocery stores. That also does tax the food at the grocery stores for tourists, not just locals. So that is a tax revenue stream that the city may want to pause on trying to forego entirely and instead continue to do the food tax refund process. The other one is on the commodity of electricity sales, which we also tax at the local level. Those 2 items would be the 2 that we would recommend deviating from the state exemption process, which is allowable if we did do this migration. The last, I guess, change that would result in this type of process would be not only the migration of the tax collection process over to the state, but also the audit initiation process for any sales tax remitters. So the city would be kind of migrating that control from its own home rule designation over to the state if we were to adopt this. And that is not something that can be negotiated. So based on kind of the pros and cons listed above, listed tonight, with an improved taxpayer experience, the potential for additional revenue for the city, kind of buffering kind of the staffing challenges that come about time to time, and then also the cost avoidance of some substantially larger tax software solution, staff is recommending a migration over to state collections if the council wishes.
Thank you for that. Couple questions for you. Every month, we are so lucky to get our tax reports and updates. Are we going to be able to get the same level of detail and information that we currently enjoy?
So the, excuse me, the state does have its own industry codes that it utilizes. And so I would have to do an analysis on their actual industry codes, which are probably a lot more granular than ours, and see how I could best compartmentalize and package those to provide you with some level of delineation between different types of industries within our community and where the tax revenue is coming from. But I do think that's easily achievable.
And then when it comes to digging into information, it sounds like they pretty much give us whatever they can. So anything that we would need beyond that, are there, as much as you know, are amenable to working with you if you were to say, hey, we're trying to find out more information about this. They've been a good, or they will be a decent partner in working with you?
Yes, I believe that's a true statement.
And then you were saying monthly remittance on sales tax. They are monthly as well?
There's different striations on whether they have to be monthly, quarterly, or annual filers, and it depends on the dollar value of the remittance. So we would probably migrate to that same level of stipulations for when a taxpayer would have to remit on what frequency. It would depend on the amount of funds that they were basically remitting back to the jurisdiction. But the state does have monthly, quarterly, and annual filers. We actually have some of all of those as well.
But does it remove some burden for local businesses?
It actually, again, it'll remove the burden of having to file in two places if you're only remitting sales tax, because then you will no longer have to file with us directly. You just file everything with the state, and they already have to file with the state.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
You know, I know very little about this, and I'm not afraid to admit it. I trust in you guys, you know, in your advisement and stuff like that. So I'm all ears. So.
May I comment?
Sure.
Sure. Pete and I have been looking at this for 4 years. And so we have been very slow in bringing this recommendation forward because we really wanted to see the experience of other communities as a litmus test for us. We're going to lose some control if we do this. However, the trade-off for that is an enormous amount of expense that we don't incur. And quite frankly, we think it might have some great rewards for the community. We're to the point now we feel comfortable with that. The second thing I would tell you, we're one of only 4 municipalities now, I can't remember, not using the system.
So actually, we did create a linkage with the sales and use tax software that the state recently implemented. It's called SUTS. So we did actually adopt a linkage between that and built it between our existing system and the state portal. That is only one of 2 portals that the state utilizes. The state also has a process that it's used for decades.
Yeah,
and that process is seeing greater filings and greater compliance at this point, which is, I think, at times what we're currently missing out on. So we were one of 7 or so initially that did not adopt this new system, which was a requirement in recent legislation, basically was calling out communities by name to basically say, you need to adopt this. That legislation actually got changed and said, if you don't adopt this, you will actually forfeit the right for state grants. It does not impact us because we did actually implement regardless, but there are some real new reaches by the state legislation in terms of the home rule allowances.
And so that's what I just wanted to bring to your attention is that the state believes it has a case for statewide concern. I don't think this is one worth battling it over. We see a lot of benefits for the local community and are asking for council's support. Just could you go over next steps, Pete, if council is in general agreement tonight? Thanks.
Yeah, so the next steps is that we would need as staff to bring back an ordinance to adopt code revisions effective January 1st to the tax code within the city's municipal code. And essentially that will align us with the state, barring those couple of exceptions that we would recommend. And once that's done, the state, seeing that ordinance authorization and potentially the resolution proposed tonight, if that was signed, that would give the state enough assurances that we would be moving to a state collection process come January 1st, and they would work with us to do the administrative work of that.
Can you say for some reason we were unhappy, can you move away from this system?
So that actually has occurred even with a Down Valley neighbor. About a decade ago, the city of Carbondale was using state collection process. They migrated away from state collection process and just recently moved back.
Went back.
So, and again, they have seen a significant uptick in their collections as a result of moving back.
Awesome. Next steps?
Our request from you tonight would be a motion to pursue this and to prepare the code amendments necessary for implementation to meet state requirements.
That'd be Resolution 73.
Yeah, yes.
I move we adopt Resolution 73.
I'll second.
Motion and a second.
I'll third. What?
Okay, I was just seeing if you had any questions or anything.
Good.
Okay. All right, can we have a roll call vote then for Resolution 73?
Counselor Doyle.
Yes.
Counselor Howenstein.
Yes.
Counselor Rose.
Yes.
Mayor Tory.
Yes. Thanks, Pete.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pete.
Mr. Mayor, staff
Sir.
requesting that council go into executive session pursuant to CRS 246424A, purchase acquisition of real or personal property. 4B, conference with the attorney for the local public body. 4E, determining positions relative to matters that may be subject to negotiations. Specific items of discussion involve the following: ongoing litigation, Centennial Owners Association versus City of Aspen, and the City of Aspen versus Burlingame Ranch 2 Condominium Owners Association, Supreme Court case number 22 SC 9293. Potential litigation, Burlingame 3, including Burling LLC and the Department of Local Affairs. Council goes into executive session. The executive session will be recorded, and the recording will be maintained by the clerk for a period of not less than 90 days. As is normal, if you go into executive session, we will convene downstairs in electric pass. We will not return here to these chambers for adjournment.
I'll make a motion to go into executive session.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second for executive session. Any further discussion? Could we have a roll call vote for executive session, please?
Counselor Doyle.
Yes.
Counselor Howenstein.
Yes.
Counselor Rose.
Yes.
Mayor Tory.
Yes. We thank you so much, GrassRoots, as always. Have a good evening. We will be adjourning our executive session and not coming back on air, and we will adjourn from downstairs. We will not be continuing any business after the executive session. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful evening. Have a great 4th of July, and we will see you in 2 weeks. Ooh, ooh.